Zhang Yuqing has gone through the book. This is a thunderous ancient Chinese novel, in which the male and female protagonists love passionately and passionately, crashing against the wall. From engagement, breakup, the female protagonist marrying someone else, to reuniting with the male protagonist with their children, and finally the male protagonist happily becomes the successor, full of dog blood. Zhang Yuqing originally intended to remain low-key, develop obscenely, and accumulate strength to avenge her deep-seated blood. Until one day, she found out that she was actually the canon fodder original match of the male lead of the Takeover Hero. Unexpectedly, the peerless injustice is her own. Zhang Yuqing, who deeply felt the malice in this world, calmly rolled up her sleeves. Well done, since she had taken on this identity, she had to exert the greatest advantage of this identity and accumulate strength. Her best skills were not just endurance and planning. Those who want to see her unlucky are destined to be disappointed. And those who have committed heinous crimes on her revenge list, wash your neck and wait for her. She won't let go of any of them. Keywords of the novel. Husband has a crush without pop-ups, husband has a crush. Download the complete TXT collection, Husband Has a Crush. Read the latest chapters of his crush. Chapter 1. A noble young master comes to the town. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. A noble young master comes to the town. The sun slowly rose, and on the quiet mountain path, there were only the crisp chirping of birds and the rapid gasping of girls. Zhang Yuqing wrapped his face in a cloth handkerchief, his dark eyes filled with fear. He stumbled and ran wildly on the rugged mountain road, nervously turning his head from time to time. The coarse linen clothes covered the deep blue and purple marks left by the rope binding on his fair and weak wrist. Follow this mountain road and you will reach Shuxue town at the foot of the mountain. She has been in this world for 15 years, and the mysterious force that brought her here tells her that it is a world generated from novels. In order to help her adapt to this world ahead of time, the mysterious force cast her on a newborn baby girl 15 years before the novel began. After briefly introducing the plot, she completely left. When she first arrived in this world, a baby's body contained two souls. She watched as a bystander as the little girl slowly grew up under the love of her parents, sharing the love she had never enjoyed before. When she was 2 years old, she encountered an accident, both of her parents died from human error, and the little girl's soul also left this world. She took over this body and was taken to the mountains by her adoptive father and brother. Because the official plot has not yet begun, fearing that she might go out early and disrupt the development trajectory of this world, mysterious forces have locked her range of activities in the rarely traveled mountains. To her, the place outside the mountains was like an undeveloped map in the game, a hazy expanse. Until today, the world outside the mountains suddenly became clear. Extending to the distant fields, undulating wheat waves, rural paths, and farmers pushing unicycles on the road. Each one was presented before her eyes. Zhang Yuqing knew that the plot began today. The mysterious power that brought her to this world told her that due to its mistake, she died unexpectedly in the original world. In order to compensate for her life, it sent her to this world. In this novel world, she is neither a heroine nor an important supporting role, but a person who died young after being touched by a pen. The mysterious power sent her here to continue her life on behalf of the original owner. And today, it is the day when the male protagonist Lu Wei passes by Shuxue town in the book, which is also the starting point of the entire plot. She must seize this opportunity today and let Lu Wei take her away from here, otherwise once caught back, she will be sold to a dirty place and will never be recovered. It is said that Shuxue town is the busiest place among the 8 villages within 10 miles, and it is just a small town, with a street less than 100 meters long. She vaguely remembered the beginning of the novel, where the male protagonist, Lu Wei, was traveling outside under his tutelage. When he returned to the capital, he passed by Shuxue town and stopped at a tea house in Shuxue town to drink tea. Zhang Yuqing took a few breaths, breathed steadily, stood at the door of the tea house, and looked inside. Several tea rooms inside the tea house are covered by cloth curtains, and in one of them stands a tall and sturdy young man standing at the door, holding his chest and guarding. He has a bee waist and ape arms, sharp eyes, and looks like a trainee. That's it. Before the young man could see him, Zhang Yuqing quickly withdrew his gaze. The waiter at the door looked up and down at Zhang Yuqing, dressed up as an ordinary rural woman, not like someone who had money to drink tea. He frowned and said, "Miss, we are all wealthy guests here, but we don't want to stand here and look around. It makes the nobles angry. Second brother, I want to go in and sell my circle. Could you please make it convenient for me?" Zhang Yuqing pulled out a gold collar embedded with jade from her collar, pulled off the small goldfish hanging at the bottom of the collar, and handed it to the shop assistant. The small goldfish is carved vividly, shining with dazzling golden light in the noon sun. The shopkeeper stared straight at the goldfish, and upon weighing it, there was 1 or 2. Zhang Yuqing reminded, "Second brother." The shop assistant quickly picked up the little goldfish in his arms as if waking up from a dream, glanced left and right, and lowered his voice, saying, "Our shopkeeper has gone home for lunch. You go in and come out quickly. If you don't buy it, don't bother with it." "Thank you very much." Zhang Yuqing breathed a sigh of relief and lifted his foot into the tea house. Entering the tea house, Zhang Yuqing untied the cloth handkerchief on the bun and walked towards the young man guarding the door. The young man looked at her in confusion, secretly surprised that there was such a graceful woman in this rural area. She was so graceful and beautiful that at first glance it was hard to take her away. When Zhang Yuqing walked up to him, the young man stopped her. "Miss, there's someone here," the young man whispered. Zhang Yuqing took out the gold collar and said, "Young master, this is the gold collar passed down from my family. It's now sold at a low price. Are you interested?" The young man didn't even glance at the gold collar and waved his hand, saying, "I'm not interested." Zhang Yuqing clenched her fist, with a sweet smile on her face. With a thick face, she once again presented the collar with both hands in front of the person and said earnestly, "This collar is from Beijing, very valuable." The young man smiled, somewhat disdainful, and casually glanced at the collar. After seeing the shape and inscription of the collar clearly, his expression gradually became more solemn. He then went to see Zhang Yuqing, and the more he looked at the woman's appearance, the more frightened he became. "You wait, I'll show it to my master." The young man took the gold collar, lifted the curtain, and went in. Zhang Yuqing stood outside, with a curtain blocking her view, unable to see what was inside. My adoptive father took her and her brother to hide in the deep mountains. After 13 years of almost isolation from the world, they were still found by their enemies. My adoptive father died tragically, and the home he relied on for survival was burned to ashes. She was knocked unconscious by Wang Dali, who had settled in the mountain with them while going out to do laundry, and hid in the cellar. Although she escaped the killing of her enemies, she could be sold to a brothel by Wang Dali at any time. If Lu Wei refused to see her, Zhang Yuqing couldn't help but tremble. Success or failure lies in this one move. Yes, she won a living. Defeated. Zhang Yuqing clenched her fist. She couldn't defeat, everyone had a way out, but she was a rootless person like a duckweed. Time passed by minute by second, and in the afternoon of April, the heat fluctuated, but Zhang Yuqing's hands and feet were trembling with coldness. Finally, a young man's voice rang out from behind the curtain, "What's your name?" The voice was mellow and deep, with surprise and a hint of indifference. "My biological father's surname is Zhang, and his name is Ming, so he named me Zhang Yuqing." Zhang Yuqing tried to stabilize his trembling voice. The curtain was lifted by someone, and light shone through it. A piece of jade-white brocade robe swayed gently in the light and shadow. Zhang Yuqing lowered his head and only saw the swaying train and a pair of black satin boots below. She raised her head slightly, her gaze touching the hand that lifted the curtain, slender and fair, with distinct joints. Just as she was about to look up, the person asked, "Where did you get this collar from?" Zhang Yuqing quickly lowered her head and felt the sharp, substantive gaze hovering over her head. She pinched her fingernails in the palm of her hand and said in a steady voice, "This is what I have been wearing since I was young." "Since it was worn from childhood to adulthood, why sell it now?" the person asked again. Zhang Yuqing said, "If I encounter some difficulties, I want to try my luck and exchange some money." The person pondered and said, "Although it's a bit impolite, could you please lift your head and let me take a look, miss?" Zhang Yuqing raised his head. The 15-year-old girl is thin and delicate, with a delicate and pretty face. Her black and long eyelashes tremble lightly, like a small broom that can sweep into people's hearts. Even her eyes are hazy, showing a hint of confusion and panic. He did look very similar. Lu Wei only glanced at the girl, quickly turned his head away, and took half a step back. When Lu Wei was looking at Zhang Yuqing was also looking at Lu Wei. 17, at the age of 8, he has a tall stature, a straight back like a pine tree, a handsome face, a noble and elegant temperament, and a composure that does not match his age. Zhang Yuqing only glanced at her and then lowered her head again, secretly saying that she was truly the person who could eventually come together with the female lead, and indeed had outstanding looks. "Miss, do you still remember anything about the Zhang family?" Lu Wei asked again. Zhang Yuqing thought for a moment and said, "I only remember that the house at home was very large and full of people. My father also had a twin brother who looked exactly like him. Later, the Hu people invaded the capital. In the chaos, I lost my family and was brought here." Upon hearing these words, Lu Wei had already made a decision in his heart and said, "I know a family surnamed Zhang who describes them very much like the girl. When I return to Beijing, I will come to the door and ask if the girl is really their daughter who has been separated from their family." Zhang Yuqing took a deep breath and interrupted Lu Wei's words, asking directly, "Can you take me to Beijing, young master?" Lu Wei looked at her in surprise and remained silent. He went on a light trip with only 2 servants, which was inconvenient for him to bring a young girl with him. Moreover, this is the family business of the Zhang family. Although he has a collar and looks very much like the Zhang family, it is not appropriate for him to bring the person back directly instead of informing them first. "Don't worry, young master. If I weren't the daughter of the Zhang family, I wouldn't have stayed at the Zhang family and didn't leave." Zhang Yuqing saw him not answering, and her heart rose to her throat before continuing, "It would be very rude to come directly, but I have been away from home for more than 10 years, and I really miss my family." This statement is a bit false. She was only 2 years old when she was wandering outside. A 2-year-old child can remember anything, and there is nothing missing or not missing. Lu Wei still didn't speak, and an awkward silence spread. Zhang Yuqing bowed to the bottom with a very low posture and said sincerely, "At present, only the young master can help me go home. If I successfully recognize my family, I will never forget the great kindness of the young master in this lifetime, and repay him with a humble heart." The servant at the door couldn't help but laugh, as if mocking Zhang Yuqing's overestimation. Lu Wei, a top-class aristocrat's son, needs a village maid to tie the knot. Perhaps this laughter reminded Lu Wei, who asked, "Miss, I am just a stranger to you. Do your foster parents agree that you will follow me on the road?" Zhang Yuqing clenched his fist in his sleeve and lowered his head, saying, "They have all passed away." Lu Wei felt sorry for this woman, but it was not convenient for him to take a girl with him on the road. Moreover, this girl was also his fiancée A's cousin, so it was better for him to return to the capital first and have the Zhang family come to pick her up. With this in mind, Lu Wei made a decision and said, "Miss, go home first and wait for me to notify the Zhang family." Zhang Yuqing gritted his teeth and knelt down with a thud. The new work of Yi Yu has arrived. Overall, it is a revenge story, and the female protagonist will not start by killing everyone in all directions. There is a stage of endurance and accumulation of capital. As for what the male lead looks like, let's talk about spoilers. Only good men can be the male lead in Night Rain's works. The update is guaranteed. I hope everyone likes it. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. The Changes of Dear Guards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. The Changes of Dear Guards. Zhang Yuqing blocked Lu Wei's way out and earnestly said, "Young master, you seem to be a great kind-hearted person. Please show your kindness and take me to the capital." Lu Wei took a half-step back, as if she was going to rely on him. The pity that had just risen in his heart was washed away by the dislike. The person who adopted me is no longer in this world, and now I just want to find relatives to take a look at me, so that I can know that I am no longer a lonely person in this world. Zhang Yuqing took 2 steps on his knees, gritted his teeth and kowtowed to the ground, his forehead touching the ground. If the Zhang family is not my family, I will leave immediately, and there will be no trouble for the young master and the Zhang family. Lu Wei looked down at the woman's humble appearance and thin back, recalling the long-standing friendship between the Zhang and Lu families. The woman who claimed to be Zhang Yuqing was likely the sister of his future wife and had a poor background. He sighed slightly in his heart and said, "Get up, I'll take you to Beijing." Zhang Yuqing felt relieved and didn't get up. He said, "Thank you very much for your help, young master." Lu Wei ignored her and ordered, "Fang Mo, go buy a carriage." Their master and servant, 3 of them, came out light and simple, riding only 3 fast horses. If they brought Zhang Yuqing, they would have to buy another carriage. The gatekeeper Fang Mo glanced at the lowly kneeling Zhang Yuqing and remembered that the woman had fallen to her knees with a loud thud in order for the young master to take her to the capital. He said he would kowtow, which was shocking. The Zhang family is a scholarly family with a proud literary style. The young master's fiancée, Miss Zhang, is also one of the 4 famous beauties in the capital. Poems praising bamboo, chrysanthemums, plum blossoms, and orchids are widely circulated. It is unlikely that there is a shameless girl who grew up in the countryside and kneels whenever she wants. Thinking of this, Fang Mo lowered his head and pouted, becoming increasingly disdainful towards this rural woman. "Fang Qin, please place this." "Miss Zhang." Lu Wei turned around and entered the room, giving orders. A young man about the same age as Fang Mo came out of the room, with a smiling face. He looked at Zhang Yuqing slightly and handed him the gold collar with both hands. He politely said, "I see there is an empty room over there, very clean. I'll order you a pot of tea, and you can sit there and rest." Fang Qin refers to the farthest room from the tea room where Lu Wei is located. Zhang Yuqing glanced at the room and felt a sense of annoyance towards Lu Wei. She also felt that she had thick skin in this move, but as long as she could get out of here, let Lu Wei bother her. Anyway, Lu Wei is the official support of the female protagonist in the novel, and it has nothing to do with her. "Thank you very much, young master," Zhang Yuqing said politely, without taking the gold collar. The cost of the journey to Beijing was not small, so this circle is just my apology for bothering you. Fang Qin smiled and said, "I am the servant who serves our young master. I can't afford to be called the young master. You can call me Fang Qin. My young master's surname is Lu, and the Lu and Zhang families have had a good relationship for many years. Our young master has arranged a marriage with the eldest daughter of the Zhang family, which can be considered." Fang Qin paused for a moment, not knowing who is older between the young master in front of us and the capital named Zhang Yuqing, who is engaged to his own young master. Whether our young master should consider this young master's brother-in-law or brother-in-law, he changed his tone and said, "It can be considered a member of the Zhang family. You can take this circle, our young master." It cannot be accepted. Zhang Yuqing could only take the gold collar and say thank you. In the novel, the Lu family is also known for their extravagant lifestyle, and it is impossible for Lu Wei to be open-minded and truly accept her golden collar. Sitting in the clean and tidy tea room, Zhang Yuqing let out a soft breath, her heart still pounding wildly. Although the process of seeking someone was not very dignified, at least the result was good. The young man at the door came up and gossiped, "Shopkeeper, what did that girl say about who people breaking into the capital? What's going on? What interesting thing do you think that is? It's a real hell on earth." The shopkeeper patted the young man's head and cursed. This statement made people's hearts itch even more. Several young guys gathered around and pestered the shopkeeper to explain it clearly. 13 years ago, the defenders of Lurwei suffered a defeat. The shopkeeper couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. The Hu people rushed in from Lurwei, wielding their swords and killing all the way to the capital. TSK. After killing for a few days and nights, they really shed blood. My family has relatives who work in the capital and escaped from the pile of dead people. According to him, the Hu people are like wild beasts, grabbing good things and killing people whenever they see them. There are many high-ranking officials and nobles in the capital who squeeze out with the common people, and many people have been trampled to death. The Hu people are chasing us Han people with machetes and killing them. Countless people are being squeezed to death at the entrance of the city, and there are dead people everywhere. It's so miserable. The shopkeeper sighed. The emperor has not escaped, and the princes and grandchildren have died completely. The gold in the palace is as good as gold. Ji Yuye doesn't even know how much she has been mistreated by the Hu people. It's still the current emperor who led troops to the capital and drove away the Hu people. Since then, our great Xia has been paying tribute to the Hu people every year in exchange for years of stability. All the staff fell silent, as if they were still reminiscing about the bloody past. She escaped from the capital at that time. The young man pointed to Zhang Yuqing's tea room. The shopkeeper touched her beard and nodded. She's lucky and lucky. If you run into a good person and take her out, otherwise there's no chance of survival. What do the defenders of Lurwei eat? If they hadn't let the Hu people in, how could the people of Daxia have suffered such a great calamity? Exclaimed a dissatisfied colleague. The shopkeeper snorted and said, "Of course the court cannot let go of those wine bags and rice bags. The generals guarding the gate will be executed everywhere, leaving no one behind. Cheap on them. It's time to pull their stone statues to the side of the road. Anyone can spit at them," said the guy indignantly. Some people were grateful. Fortunately, the emperor drove away the Hu people. Zhang Yuqing listened expressionlessly to the commotion outside, her eyes icy, and her nails leaving deep marks on the tea table. Those who steal hooks will be executed, while those who steal the country will be executed by feudal lords. Some people do all their sins but can live in temples and enjoy glory, while others have their iron loyalty crushed, their bloodthirsty heads trampled on, and even their names despised by people who do not know the truth, leaving a lasting impression. Just like her, she was manipulated by fate and struggled in the darkness. Xiushui town is just a rural town with no suitable carriages, only donkey carts. Fang Mo bought 2 donkeys and a rundown car, and was worried about how to explain it to the young master. As he passed by the tea room where Zhang Yuqing was located, he glanced at the serene face revealed in the crack of the curtain, and then remembered her shameless entanglement with her own young master, as well as her earth-shattering kneeling, knocking, and sneering. "What are you thinking so much about? It would be great if a rural girl could have a sun-proof donkey cart to ride on. Let's go!" Fang Mo shouted. Zhang Yuqing concealed her excitement, and as soon as she got up, she heard a sharp woman's voice outside the tea house shouting, "Where's my daughter? Who saw my daughter?" Zhang Yuqing's face changed greatly. Fang Mo noticed that her expression was not right and immediately went out. There is a couple in their 40s at the entrance of the tea house. The woman is dressed in patched linen clothes, with a tanned face and wrinkles all over her face, resembling an ordinary rural woman. The man was wearing a blue and white brocade robe, no longer glamorous, like an old garment from many years. He stood with his hands crossed and his feet padded as he looked into the tea house, his eyes filled with an indescribable and eerie gloom. The two of them pushed aside the waiter and entered the tea house. They opened the curtains of each tea room to look for someone. Seeing that she was about to find this side, Zhang Yuqing tightly gripped the cloth curtain, exerting so much force that her joints turned white. When the two arrived at the tea room where Lu Wei was, Fang Qin stood guard at the door, blocking them from looking. The woman's rough hand tugged at Fang Qin, her expression urgent, and she screamed sharply, "Someone saw my daughter enter here. Dare you steal the big girl? Give up my daughter quickly, otherwise we will report to the authorities and arrest you." Lu Wei walked out with sharp eyes fixed on the couple. "What is your daughter's name?" The woman choked for a moment and was stunned, unable to speak. The man next to her quickly shouted fiercely, "What's the name of my daughter? What's your business?" Lu Wei frowned. The woman took the opportunity to lift the curtain of Lu Wei's tea room and saw that there was no one around. She was both anxious and panicked, and cursed loudly, "Is there any way to do this? Someone has seen her enter this shop and talk to you. The robbery of civilian women in the blue and white." Lu Wei furrowed his brows and a flash of anger flashed in his heart. That woman actually lied to him. Although both foster parents were clearly present, they fabricated a pitiful background to deceive him into taking her to Beijing. And he actually believed it. Fang Mo immediately turned around and went to the tea room where Zhang Yuqing was located. He lifted the curtain and looked at the woman sitting there quietly. He then asked directly, "Are the people outside your foster parents?" Zhang Yuqing took a deep breath and countless thoughts swirled in his heart before finally saying in humiliation, "Yes. If we don't admit that the disgusting couple are adoptive parents, we will definitely expose their true adoptive father. She can't let anyone know who her true adoptive father is. Otherwise, if the enemy knows that someone else knows about the shocking conspiracy of the past, she will be the next to die. They pulled you out of the pile of dead people and raised you so much that you cursed them dead." Fang Mo couldn't describe his feelings, looking at the delicate and weak little girl with a venomous mouth and a wicked heart. When the Luowei incident occurred, Zhang Yuqing was just a 2-year-old child and separated from her family. If someone had kindly adopted her, she would have been reincarnated countless times. Zhang Yuqing had nothing to say, clutching the hem of his linen skirt with force. "Miss, hurry up and leave. Our young master is a pure and innocent person, and we cannot let them slander us as any hooligans or robbers who rob women from the people," Fang Mo said angrily. After opening her mouth a few times, Zhang Yuqing finally said, "What's wrong with me wanting to see my true loved ones? Since they say they love me, why don't they let me go see my loved ones? Which parents can rest assured that the girl's family will follow the stranger on the road?" Fang Mo shouted angrily. The foster parents raised this girl from a young baby, and from her fair and beautiful appearance, they knew she had not suffered much. However, when she saw people from the capital, she stubbornly begged them to go back to the capital to find her biological parents, without any intention of caring for her foster parents. It was truly heartless. Wang's father and mother saw Fang Mo walking towards the innermost tea room and quickly followed him, shouting loudly, "Girl, come out." Fang Qin stared at Lu Wei's face. Lu Wei's face sank like water, until Wang Fu, who was in a hurry to run at the front, reached out to lift the door curtain, and then lifted his foot over. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. The Love of Nurturing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. The Love of Nurturing. Wang's father lifted the curtain and the two of them breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Zhang Yuqing sitting there. "Daughter. You're going to scare your mother to death." The queen mother complained and grabbed Zhang Yuqing's arm, which she forcefully shook off. Zhang Yuqing took a step back and looked coldly at the pretended queen mother and the hypocritical father next to her. The insults were almost out of her mouth, but she finally swallowed them and said, "I won't go with you. These young masters are going back to the capital and have already agreed to take me there." Wang's father, who had been silent all along, glanced at Lu Wei and whispered, "We don't even know them, how can we let you go with us? There are so many bad people, and when we turn around, we'll harm you." Fang Yamo became more and more angry as he listened. Just as he was about to speak up and teach his father a lesson, Lu Wei, who came later, spoke up coldly. Since your foster parents can't rest assured, you'd better stay. Zhang Yuqing's heart tightened and he said, Young master, you are a gentleman who reads books of sages and sages. A gentleman's promise is worth 1,000 gold coins. He promised me to take me to the capital, so it's not easy to go back and forth, is it? I promised the girl earlier because she claimed that both her foster parents had passed away and she was lonely and helpless. Lu Wei looked coldly at Zhang Yuqing. Surprisingly, he was willing to mention his previous promise. If he knew that the girl's foster parents were present, he wouldn't have agreed to take her away. Fang Qin and Fang Yamo exchanged a glance and angrily muttered to themselves that they had not read the almanac today and should not have settled here. Surprisingly, they had caused such a shameless trouble to the young master, who was as clear as the moon. The Queen Mother quickly said, That's right, you're such a naive girl. You ran out of the house without saying a word, but you scared me and your father to death. Let's go, go home. You don't think your family is poor, so you can't just follow people casually. Wang Fu exclaimed, complaining to Fang Yamo again. This girl, I don't know who said her biological parents are wealthy people in the capital, and she's so tempted to run away from home. The Queen Mother said with a loving expression, How could a wealthy person in the capital have their parents treating you well? How much affection can we have with you after so many years? Your father and I sincerely treat you as a daughter and love you. No matter how poor our family is, we won't short your food and drink. Let's go, follow me home. The 4 words of ungratefulness flashed through Lu Zhao's heart. Isn't this ingratitude? Fang Yamo muttered softly. In the Luowei incident, the Hu people went to the capital and killed so many people, causing a river of blood. If it weren't for the Wang family's adoption of Zhang Yuqing and bringing him here for over a decade, Zhang Yuqing would have been reincarnated countless times. Zhang Yuqing dodged the hand of the Queen Mother and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. He then looked up at Lu Weisher, whose eyes were already red. The beautiful phoenix eyes were sparkling with water, and his face was resolute. He pointed at Wang Dali and said, Young master, he has a wicked heart towards me, and he almost killed me several times. If you don't take me away, I will have to die here. Fart. Father Wang was furious and pointed at Zhang Yuqing, jumping uncontrollably. Nonsense. The Queen Mother burst into tears, feeling very sad and aggrieved. How could you pour dirty water on your parents? You have no conscience. Although you didn't crawl out of my belly, we have been raised as eyeballs these years. We haven't treated our own daughters well. Are you saying this to me just to find a wealthy father and mother? It's useless, don't think you can run away like this. Father Wang blushed with anger, his neck thick, and his eyes glared fiercely at Zhang Yuqing like cockfighting chickens. Zhang Yuqing ignored his parents and stared at Lu Wei with tears in his eyes, his hands clasped together. Young master, please. I have no way left. Even if I have a little solution, I won't seek help from strangers. Tears slipped from Zhang Yuqing's eyes and fell down his cheek to the ground. Fang Qin couldn't make up her mind and looked at Lu Wei. Lu Wei remained silent, and Zhang Yuqing was clearly frightened. Her beautiful and delicate face was filled with fear and anxiety, and her watery eyes looked at him in despair and helplessness. The 2 crystal-clear tears seemed to have hit his heart heavily instead of hitting the ground. Do not look down unless you are polite. Lu Wei did not turn his head and withdrew his hand into his sleeve, clenching it into a fist. Reasonably, he reminded himself that this woman was full of lies, and if he spoke so pitifully and despairingly, it was highly likely that he was lying to him again. Even if he brought this woman to the capital, it would be a real trouble. But emotionally, he felt a surge of compassion in his heart. If it were true, wouldn't he have thrown the Zhang family girl back into the wolf's den? 2 of you, come out first. Let's discuss this matter, Lu Wei said to the Wang couple. Zhang Yuqing looked at Lu Wei with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Wang and his wife were angrily invited out of the tea room by Fang Mo and went to another tea room with Lu Wei. Wang's father was extremely excited and told Lu Wei that the girl had a tendency to lie and never said a word of truth since childhood. It was him and his old wife who spoiled her. His scheming against his adopted daughter is nothing but slander. Young master, don't believe her words. Look at her delicate skin and tender flesh, she doesn't even have calluses on her hands. My biological daughter actually has to work hard and be raised rough. She wants to leave, but it's not that easy. Wang's father exclaimed with a flurry of foam. Lu Wei frowned and said, she's not your biological child. It's natural for her to want to go to the capital to recognize her. If you stop us, it will only hurt our bond. If you don't trust me, I can ask the county magistrate to come and witness. The county magistrate here is a classmate of my uncle, and he is the guarantor. What do you think? County magistrate. Wang's father exclaimed in surprise, stuttering as he saw several people watching him. We are all ordinary people, so why bother the county magistrate for this small matter? Fang Mo saw his fear of being an official and thought that Wang's father was a timid ordinary person. He smiled and said, don't be afraid, the county magistrate is just here as a witness. The queen mother became anxious and patted her thigh, shouting, even if the county magistrate comes, we can't take her away. The county magistrate can forcibly rob the daughter of the people. Don't speak recklessly. Father Wang scolded softly, turning to Lu Weisher with a pleasing smile. Don't bother the county magistrate. We have a daughter so big, you can't just take her away. Lu Wei frowned and remained silent. The queen mother saw that he seemed determined to take away his adopted daughter and gritted her teeth, saying cruelly, that girl lied to you. My head of the family was injured in that place a few years ago, so my second son can't. You. Wang's father blushed and became angry with embarrassment. He reached out to hit his mother, but she dodged him. Fang Mo was shocked, and everyone blushed and instinctively looked at Lu Wei. The queen mother wept and said, if you don't believe me, you can invite a doctor to come and diagnose me. If it's fake, let me die from lightning strikes. Lu Wei only felt that he had fed the dog with kindness and was deceived by that woman again. He had a stern face and a fiery chest, then turned around and left the tea room, walking straight towards the tea room where Zhang Yuqing was located. Fang Qin stayed in the original tea room to guard Zhang Yuqing, thought of an idea, and said, since they can't trust you, why not bring the Wang family and his wife to Beijing together, so that they can feel at ease. Zhang Yuqing's pitch-black eyes gleamed with a cold light, and he said coldly, no need. As you can see, they are just two rural people who don't understand etiquette and can't stand the stage. It's not appropriate to go to Beijing, and they offend the nobles. Lu Wei and Fang Mo stood outside the tea room, listening clearly. Greedy for vanity, ungrateful, and disrespectful lies that come out of one's mouth, crying so earth-shattering, I wish everyone could hear how much they treat me so well, it's just that they want money. Zhang Yuqing said, could you please go and ask them a question, Mr. Fang Qin? They want me to beat the drum and speak to the county magistrate about my family's affairs, so that the county magistrate can judge me. Fang Qin, come out, said Lu Weisher coldly as he couldn't bear to listen. Fang Qin responded and wanted to go out. Zhang Yuqing, feeling anxious, grabbed Fang Qin's sleeve and pleaded with tears, young master Fang Qin, please help me bring this message over. I really can't go back with them. Cheng, I'll go ask. Fang Qin felt that the girl was also pitiful and nodded in agreement. It's just a matter of asking whether to take Zhang Yuqing or their son the final say. Lu Wei looked coldly at Fang Qin who came out of the tea room. Fortunately, he thought Fang Qin was smart, but he didn't expect to be fooled by the lying fairy inside. What orders do you have, young master? Fang Qin looked at his stern expression and asked cautiously, but couldn't help but say, Miss Zhang asked me to ask the Wang couple a question. Fang Mo bared his teeth and gave him several glances, but Fang Qin couldn't understand. He cleverly swallowed the words first. Lu Whiting was holding his breath. The woman was greedy for glory, ungrateful, and lying incessantly. He really didn't want to meddle in her affairs anymore. However, just as Fang Qin was about to calm down, the woman's sorrowful and tearful face appeared in front of her, and a hint of compassion rose in her heart. "You go," Lu Wei instructed. "She is just a woman who wants to find a family member. Even if her character is lacking, it is still the responsibility of the Zhang family and has nothing to do with her." Wang's father kept saying that he couldn't take people away so easily. He was asking for money both inside and outside of his words, and this matter was not difficult to solve. Fang Qin respectfully bowed and turned into the tea room of the Wang couple, saying, "Both of you, your young lady asked me to ask you a question. Are you going to force her to talk about family matters with the county magistrate and have him evaluate them?" Wang's father and mother were both anxious and angry, looking at each other and seeing panic in their eyes. Upon seeing this, Fang Qin smiled kindly and said, "Miss, you must be joking with both of you. With all these years of family affection, how could we not have caused trouble in court?" Wang Fu nodded vaguely and said, "It's just that the affairs of the common people with flat heads can't bother the county magistrate. But it's not a problem for you to be so deadlocked." Fang Qin chuckled, "Since you love her, why bother being villains to stop her from recognizing her?" Father Wang's expression changed a few times before finally gritting his teeth and saying, "You said lightly. She can't just leave at once. If she leaves, won't we be left with nothing? Speaking of which, what else does Fang Qin not understand? Can you offer me a price?" Fang Qin couldn't help but smile. Wang's father's eyes were shining brightly. He had already noticed that Fang Qin and his group were dressed in glamorous clothes and must be wealthy. He blurted out, 1,000, no, 10,000 taels. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Fang Qin became angry and said, "I advise you to think carefully before speaking up. Are they the big shots? That Miss Zhang is made of gold, and she is actually worth 10,000 taels. It really broadens his horizons. Even in the hard-earned capital, buying a maid is only 3 to 5 taels of silver. What is 10,000 taels of silver when you are so rich?" Father Wang exclaimed with a crossover, "With her delicate and tender appearance, some people are willing to pay a big price for her." The Queen Mother also agreed, "That's right, she's the daughter of the capital. There's nothing more beautiful than her in these 10 miles and 8 villages." Fang Qin was furious and looked at Wang's father and mother with disgust in her eyes. "I used to think these two people genuinely loved their adopted daughter, but I didn't expect them to ask the lion for money. I'll leave this for you. Don't want to leave without 10,000 taels of silver." Wang Fu snorted coldly. "Where is our home? She comes whenever she wants, and leaves whenever she wants." Lu Wei and Fang Mo could hear clearly outside. Fang Mo gritted his teeth and whispered, "Young master, what do you care about her? What kind of things is this family? Can't we let the Zhang family handle it? Look at the way she lies and comes straight out, maybe even the Zhang family doesn't want to recognize her." Fang Qin advised a few more words over there. Wang's father bit to death 10,000 taels of silver and didn't let go. He spoke confidently and said that their young master must have been obsessed with lust and had set his sights on his daughter's good color, with ulterior motives. Lu Wei didn't speak, his eyebrows furrowed, and his slender and fair fingers tapped on the handle of the folding fan in his hand. It was obvious that he was extremely impatient with this family in his heart. Fang Qin had never seen such a mischievous scoundrel before. He angrily threw the curtain and cursed that he had not read the almanac when he went out today, and unexpectedly encountered such a top-notch family of goods. One is ungrateful, the other is obsessed with money. Neither father nor daughter is a good person, truly a family. Fang Yimou pouted and muttered, seeing Fang Qin come out. His eyes rolled and he said to Lu Wei, "I'll go ask how things are." Fang Yimou ran up to Fang Qin and whispered about the fact that the queen mother had just cursed and swore that her father was injured and that he was a eunuch. "I said you can grow dim sum. Don't let the girl cheat you again." Fang Yimou hooked Fang Qin's neck and said in his ear, "I don't see you all standing outside. Don't you want to take care of this?" Fang Qin was both surprised and embarrassed. He glanced at Lu Wei standing not far away and complained, "Why didn't you say it earlier?" This caused him to misunderstand the meaning of the young master. "Didn't there be no chance just now?" Fang Yimou said. Fang Qin hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, leave this matter to me for handling. I think what young master means is to handle it if you can, and if you can't handle it, there's nothing you can do. Young master has a kind heart and can't bear to leave her alone, but when you think about it, if you really take her back, it's just like her." Fang Mo's chin turned to Fang Xiangnu of Zhang Yuqing. "The Zhang family doesn't recognize her, so they have to rely on us, young master." The more Fang Qin thought about it, the more frightened she became. The woman could pour dirty water on her adoptive father to find wealthy relatives and frame him for injustice. What else could she not do? If she's not from the Zhang family, then she will definitely rely on her own young master. How could a noble and flawless person like my own young master, who is so beautiful and full of time, get into such trouble? Far away, what does Miss Zhang of the Zhang family think? "You can handle it yourself, and I'll pass you a letter. Don't make it difficult for the young master." Fang Yimou whispered. Fang Qin had a decision in his heart and ran over to Lu Wei, complaining, "That girl's adoptive father killed 10,000 taels of silver before he could take her away. Isn't that ridiculous? 10,000 taels of silver are enough to buy a golden man. They obviously don't want to let go. Young master, we can't do anything about it. After all, he is an adoptive father, and his kindness is greater than his. We don't make sense. Look, it's getting late, if we delay any longer, we won't be able to make our way today." That's right, Wan Yi spent 10,000 taels of silver to bring back to the capital. She's not a girl from the Zhang family, she's a Shibei commodity. What should she do then? She can't even get rid of it. Fang Yimou agreed, but couldn't let her own young master's reputation be ruined. Zhang Yuqing heard everything clearly in the tea room and, feeling anxious, lifted the curtain and came out, saying, "Lord Lu." Fang Yimou quickly reached out and sneered, "Hey, don't you want to kneel down and kowtow again?" Zhang Yuqing's eyes turned red and he felt embarrassed, his hands clenched into fists. Fang Qin sighed and said, "Miss, it's not that we don't help you, it's really that your foster parents don't let you go. Our young master has done everything we can to help you with this. Lord Lu, a gentleman's promise is worth 1,000 gold." Zhang Yuqing looked at Lu Wei and said. Fang Yimou became anxious and interrupted Zhang Yuqing's words, calling out in anger, "How dare you mention this? It's clear that you cheated first." Lu Wei raised his hand, stopped Fang Yimou, and spoke coldly, "I did promise the girl to take her to Beijing, but as things have progressed to this point, I apologize for my helplessness and cannot fulfill my promise. At most, the Wang family is a bit greedy. Since Wang's father is physically ill, he cannot do anything to this girl. This girl will not be at a loss in the Wang family." He hurried back to the capital to notify the Zhang family, and it won't take too long. "I know this has caused great trouble to the young master, and I feel very guilty in my heart, but if I had a second way to go, I would never have troubled him so much," Zhang Yuqing said urgently. Lu Wei said, "Don't worry, Mississippi. As soon as we return to Beijing, we will inform the Zhang family and ask them to pick you up as soon as possible." Zhang Yuqing's heart wrenched. Wang Dali was addicted to gambling and his debt was so high that he was about to be chopped off by the creditors. He had hoped to sell her and turn her around. After experiencing today's situation, he knew she wanted to run away, and he was afraid that he would sell her when Lu Weiwei left. Moreover, her biological parents have both passed away for 13 years, and it is unknown whether the remaining relatives will come to pick her up. Lord Lu, can you make a bet with me? Zhang Yuqing calmed down and gritted his teeth with a smile. Lu Wei frowned and said, "What bet?" "My adoptive father said he wanted 10,000 taels of silver before letting me leave. I know no one can agree to this matter." Zhang Yuqing said slowly, "But if I have a way, let my adoptive father agree to 30 taels of silver and let me go. Is the young master willing to lend me 30 taels of silver and take me to Beijing?" Fang Mo sneered, dreaming. "Your father wants 10,000 taels. The couple clearly wanted to make a fortune by adopting their daughter, and only 30 taels of silver wanted to send them away. It's just daydreaming." Zhang Yuqing looked at Lu Wei with a cold expression, his heart beating like a drum, but his face showed no signs of unease. He smiled and said, "Are you willing to make this bet, young master?" Fang Qin and Fang Mo both looked at Lu Wei, feeling that this beautiful girl might not have lost her heart and could even speak of such a gambling agreement. The Wang couple cannot agree no matter what. Lu Wei nodded slightly and said, "If your adoptive father doesn't agree, please ask the girl to come home with them. I promised the girl to notify the Zhang family and I will definitely do it. Just wait with peace of mind, girl." Zhang Yuqing released his clenched fist and said, "It's a deal." In the tea room, Wang's father saw Zhang Yuqing enter and was furious. He reached out to greet Zhang Yuqing in the face, but as soon as he wanted to damage the face of the stinky girl, he couldn't sell it for a good price. He slapped her hard and jumped to curse, "You stinky girl." Zhang Yuqing stood still and looked at him coldly, saying, "If I can't leave today, I'll take you to die together." Wang's father was furious, lowered his voice, gritted his teeth and pointed at Zhang Yuqing, cursing, "Do you dare to threaten me even if you're all naughty? If it weren't for my kindness in taking you in, you would have been killed long ago. Daughter, if you are honest and obedient, I will advise the head of the household not to sell you and leave you as our family's treasure to be our daughter. In law, said the Queen Mother, I promise to treat you as my own daughter. Zhang Yuqing almost burst out laughing and sneered, "Your own daughters are getting worse and worse. It's really unlucky to be reincarnated into your family. I dare not take this blessing." The Queen Mother became anxious and said, "Do you really care about you as a relative in the capital?" "I really care about you. I've been looking for you for a long time." Zhang Yuqing asked, "Do you know which family's girl I am from in the capital? Your relatives in the capital have really died, as we have seen with our own eyes. Your parents, grandparents have all died. A dozen or so members of your family have been killed by the Hu people. You were only 2 years old at that time and don't remember anything," said the Queen Mother with a bitter and thoughtful expression on her face. Zhang Yuqing interrupted the Queen Mother's words, "It's better to save time if you make up such nonsense. I have already found my relatives through this young master. Do you know why? Because of me, I was born incredibly intelligent." Zhang Yuqing sneered, her eyes sharp as knives, staring at her father. "I remember exactly what happened when I was 2 years old." Wang's father suddenly broke out in a cold sweat and stared at Zhang Yuqing with a heart-pounding expression. "Don't you believe it? When my wet nurse was strangled to death by you back then, her eyes were so wide and her tongue was so long. Did you forget?" Zhang Yuqing took a step closer and smiled like a desperate demon. Wang's father shrank back in shock, trembling with fear. No, it's impossible. You can't remember it. A 2-year-old child can't even speak, how can they remember things? Don't forget what I said. If I can't leave today, I'll let you die together." Zhang Yuqing said word by word, "If you dare to stop me again, I'll tell everyone the sin you've committed." Wang's father and mother trembled uncontrollably. "Since you remember what happened when you were 2 years old, why haven't you said it all these years?" The Queen Mother had a sudden idea and asked in a low voice. Zhang Yuqing had a clear smile, but her words were extremely malicious. What's the rush? I'm telling you now, you guys have to die too. When the Hu people entered the capital and her biological parents died tragically, the wet nurse held her and escaped from the capital. However, on the chaotic way out of the capital, she met the demon Wang Dali. Wang Dali, treacherous, killed the wet nurse and stole the property. If it weren't for her foster father passing by with his brother, I'm afraid she would have been strangled to death by Wang Dali. She always wants revenge, but her adoptive father's identity is dangerous. For so many years, she has been living in seclusion, afraid of being discovered by her enemies. There are still a few members of Wang Dali's family who cannot be completely killed, nor can they be called to report to the authorities and cause the death of their adoptive father. And she is also trapped in the mountains by the plot, unable to do anything. She can only bury her hatred in her heart, reminding herself of the deep blood and hatred she bears every day. Wang's father gritted his teeth and shouted, "Don't be proud. Your godfather must have offended a very important person. If it weren't for my kindness to bring you to my house, you would have been killed by those who seek revenge. If you dare to speak up about what happened back then, I will expose that you were the adopted daughter of that family. You wouldn't have escaped death either." Zhang Yuqing sighed at how shameless people are and how invincible the world is. Wang Dali was burdened with gambling debts and saw that her adoptive father had been in trouble. He knocked her unconscious and took her home, hoping to sell her. Surprisingly, they all became her life-saving benefactors. She sat down confidently in front of her father Wang and said kindly, "You go. You see how destined we are. If we die together, we can still be companions on the road to the underworld. Go away, who wants to be with you on the Huangquan road?" Father Wang fought with his teeth. Zhang Yuqing put away his smiling face and said coldly, 30 taels of silver, plus one more Wang Chuanyang. Let me summarize that Zhang Yuqing came to this world 15 years ago and became a newborn baby girl. At the age of 2, he encountered the Luowei incident and his parents tragically died in the capital. The wet nurse continued to flee with her, while the weak woman with her child was targeted by the villain Wang Dali who had also escaped from the capital, causing her death. Just as Zhang Yuqing was about to be killed by Wang Dali, a father and son passed by and saved him. They settled in the mountains far away from the capital and lived a life of isolation. Wang Dali's family also settled in the mountains. Zhang Yuqing wanted to seek revenge for killing Wang Dali, but on the one hand, she was imprisoned by a mysterious force here. On the other hand, her adoptive father's enemy had too much influence. If Wang Dali was killed, his wife and children would definitely cause trouble and bring disaster to his adoptive father and brother. The current situation is that the enemy killed his foster father and his foster brother is missing, but Zhang Yuqing was secretly kidnapped by Wang Dali and not discovered by the enemy. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. The Gear of Fate. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. The Gear of Fate. Zhang Yuqing stood up and looked down at the shrunken Wang couple. "I'll give you 30 taels of silver. From now on, Wang Chuanyang and I have nothing to do with you anymore." Wang's father suddenly realized and became furious. "I said I tied it so firmly with a rope, how could you still run away? It turned out that Chuanyang, that little slut, let you out. What do you want Chuanyang to do? She's already married and belongs to someone else's family," the queen mother asked in shock. Zhang Yuqing reached out her finger and stood it up on her rosy lips, softly hissing, "Don't talk so much nonsense, I don't like to hear it. What to do is your business, I just need to take people away. 30 liang is too little, I can't ask for someone from Chuanyang's family." Wang Fu smiled and said. Zhang Yuqing sighed and felt a bit distressed. "It can't be done. It's impossible. If you ask those wealthy people for more money, give it to me. From now on, you go through your own path, and our well water won't invade the river." Father Wang quickly said. Zhang Yuqing stood up and looked at him with a smile. "I'll go talk to those wealthy people about what happened back then, and see if they're willing to give more money to my family for the sake of our lives. Come back, come back. Wang Fu fell to the ground in great fear, tightly gripping the hem of Zhang Yuqing's skirt. Zhang Yuqing's face was resolute. 30 taels of silver and 1 Wang Chuanyang, yes, I'll go through my own path. We both have our own tricks on each other, and in the future, we'll treat each other as strangers and never interact with each other until we die old. No, then let's tear apart our faces and expose each other's secrets. Let's go die together. Wang's father looked at Zhang Yuqing's lotus face, scratching his heart with 100 claws. He quickly calculated that if he wanted to take Wang Chuanyang out of his mother-in-law's house, he might have to spend 5 taels of silver, and only 20.5 taels of silver would be lost in the end. He is really unwilling to sell such a beautiful girl for only 25 taels. Zhang Yuqing kicked away Wang's father's hand that was pulling at her skirt and impatiently asked, "Is it okay or not?" The Queen Mother anxiously said, "As the head of the household, 30 taels of silver is not bad. This girl is a disaster. Jin Bao is still young, so we can't lose our parents. What if you run back to the capital, recognize influential relatives, and find someone to kill me and silence me?" Father Wang's eyes flickered, glaring at Zhang Yuqing with malice. Zhang Yuqing said indifferently, "I went to the capital to meet my relatives so that I can eat and drink without worries in the future. I have a good life, but I have put in a lot of effort to find someone to kill you. Is there nowhere to spend my money? I want to use it on you. Besides, you are not my foster parents. Who is that? Why should I cause trouble? Everyone just wants to live a good life, why bother making such a fuss? As long as you keep your mouth shut, I will forget who you are. But if you stop me from living a good life without worrying about food and drink, I can only play with you." Zhang Yuqing looked coldly at the Wang couple and said, "People die for wealth, birds die for food. You understand this truth better than me." Upon hearing what Zhang Yuqing meant, the Wang couple looked at him, trembling all over and feeling a chill in their hearts. Zhang Yuqing stood up straight and smiled, saying, "Your son Jin Bao really likes me and wants to marry me as his wife. How about I take him to die together? I'll be a pair of ghost ducks with him and go to the underworld to show filial piety to you too." "No, no." The Queen Mother exclaimed in surprise, covering her mouth in fear that outsiders might hear. Wang Jinbao is the lifeblood and weakness of the Wang couple. Wang's father gritted his teeth hard and said, "Success. Give me 30 taels of silver, and I'll let you go with Wang Chuanyang." "Good dad, you really hurt me." Zhang Yuqing smiled contentedly and breathed a sigh of relief. Her palms and back were covered in cold sweat, and she had just been supported by a single breath. Wang's father looked up and glared at Zhang Yuqing with malice. "If you dare to trouble us after recognizing your family, you can wait for me. I will return this to you as it is. After I recognize my family, if you dare to come and beat my autumn wind and ask me for money, you can also wait for me," said Zhang Yuqing coldly. Lu Wei and others stood outside, tall and jade standing, with a folding fan gently waving. The galloping horses on the fan surface were lifelike, as if they could jump out of paper with agility. The handsome and cold young master just stood there, making the rudimentary tea room shine like a beautiful scenery. The three of them didn't see Mr. and Mrs. Wang and Zhang Yuqing coming out for a long time. The tea room curtains were tightly closed, and their voices were lowered, making it difficult to hear what they were saying. "Young master, let's go. This can't be done. It's impossible." Fang Mo glanced at the sun outside. "She's dragging around, maybe she's thinking of some crooked idea to blame us." Although Fang Qin did not speak, the expression on his face indicated that he was thinking the same as Fang Mo. "Take the time to leave now, don't let that girl cling on." "Wait a little longer," said Lu Wei. Not long after, the curtain of the tea room was lifted, and Zhang Yuqing walked over with a straight back and a calm expression. Looking at Lu Wei standing on the windowsill of the tea house, bathed in the sunlight, Zhang Yuqing thought indifferently that the world is unfair no matter where. Some people, born with good fortune, are the darling of the heavenly way, the protagonist of this world, living in the sunshine, have a bright future, and can turn misfortune into good fortune in everything. And some people, born with ups and downs, life and death are unpredictable, and it's hard to move a step forward. They exert all their strength and dignity, hoping only to survive and barely survive. Lu Wei watched as she walked up to him. "Young master, my adoptive parents agreed and allowed me to leave. 30 taels of silver will settle the nurturing relationship," Zhang Yuqing said with a smile. Feng Mo's mouth widened in surprise, and it took him a while to retrieve his voice. "No, it's impossible. Young master, if you don't believe it, you can ask my foster parents." Zhang Yuqing said, nervously looking at Lu Wei, "A promise from a gentleman is worth 1,000 gold. Young master, don't you want to fulfill the gambling agreement?" Lu Wei closed the folding fan and instructed Feng Qin, "Give her 30 taels of silver." "Lord Lu, please wait a little longer." Zhang Yuqing quickly stopped Lu Wei as he turned around and walked out. Feng Mo grumbled impatiently, "What else are you doing?" Lu Wei turned around and looked at Zhang Yuqing. Zhang Yuqing clenched his hand into a fist in his sleeve and smiled, saying, "I still want to bring someone to Beijing. She will be there soon." Feng Mo pointed at Zhang Yuqing and couldn't believe that the woman was so shameless. You. "Who?" asked Lu Wei. "My foster parents' second sister, Wang Chuanyang," said Zhang Yuqing. "What are you taking her for?" Feng Qin asked with a bitter face. Zhang Yuqing hesitated to speak, his eyes flickered a few times, and finally said, "Wang Chuanyang has been serving me for many years, and I have become accustomed to it." Feng Mo was shocked and said, "How dare you treat your sister like a maid? How shameless a person can be, he has gained a lot of knowledge today." Zhang Yuqing shamelessly said to Lu Wei, "Don't worry, young master. The money for buying Wang Chuanyang is included in these 30 taels of silver." Lu Wei ignored Zhang Yuqing and turned around to leave. "This woman has a beautiful face and her behavior is really despicable. It's too lazy to take a second look. Is this about silver?" Feng Mo complained angrily to Feng Qin. Feng Qin nudged Feng Mo with his elbow and said, "The young master didn't say anything, just say a few words less." Feng Mo muttered and went out, his face full of displeasure. Wang's father and mother went to find Wang Chuanyang and agreed with Zhang Yuqing to pay both the money and the person. Feng Qin was meticulous and gave the shopkeeper a hanging of money. He asked the shopkeeper to be a witness and write a document to avoid any trouble in the future. The shopkeeper of the tea house was very willing to help with the money, and while writing, he said to Feng Qin, "I recognize this Wang Dali. He is not from our place. Over a decade ago, he settled down with a large family in our place and settled down in the mountains, which are more than 10 miles south. The mountains are all covered with stones and there is little farmland. In the past decade, there have only been 2 households in the mountains. Is there another family?" Feng Qin asked casually. The shopkeeper nodded, dipped a pen in ink, and said, "That family doesn't go out very much. Someone still went into the mountain to ask Wang Dali for debt. It was only when they saw smoke coming from the neighboring mountain that they knew there was another family in this mountain. This Wang Dali, when he first settled here, he was quite wealthy and played everything from eating, drinking, prostitution to gambling. Later on, he estimated that his family was almost defeated by him, owed a lot of gambling debts, and was almost killed by someone. It took a long time to settle down, but he still came to gamble every 3 to 5 days when he received some money. Now that he had the silver to sell girls, it was enough for him to be elegant for a while." The shopkeeper shook his head and sighed, dried his ink, and handed the note to Feng Qin. Feng Qin sneered disdainfully. Not long after, Wang's father and mother came over with a woman in her 20s, patched in linen. The woman was carrying a light and flowing bundle, thin and haggard, with a handkerchief covering most of her face. Zhang Yuqing breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the woman. The woman, with a pair of gentle autumn-like eyes, walked quickly to Zhang Yuqing and looked at her anxiously. Zhang Yuqing took the woman's hand and comforted her in a low voice, "Chuanyang." Wang's father snorted from his nostrils, his flesh aching uncontrollably. "Spring Yang, I have brought it to you. I want 5 taels of silver from you." "What's going on?" Wang Chuanyang asked Zhang Yuqing with fear. Zhang Yuqing whispered, "Let's talk about it later." "Where's the silver?" Father Wang asked angrily. Fang Qin patted a heavy bag of silver on the counter of the tea house. Wang's father's eyes suddenly lit up, and he reached out to grab it. Fang Qin quickly moved the silver to a different position, causing Wang's father to pounce empty. "You!" Father Wang was both surprised and angry. Fang Qin smiled and said, "Please sign a document first." Father Wang recognized a few words, glanced at the notes, and angrily pressed a fingerprint on it. He snatched the silver from the counter and carried it into his arms. Zhang Yuqing looked at the bright red handprint on the note and breathed a soft sigh. The stiff muscles on all 4 limbs relaxed. Finally, the dust settled. "Let's go." Zhang Yuqing pulled Wang Chuanyang out. Wang Chuanyang turned around and looked at her father and mother. She couldn't help but cry out with tears, "Mother." Wang's father borrowed a scale from the shopkeeper and was busy weighing silver, but ignored Wang Chuanyang. The queen mother glanced at her tearful daughter and realized that it was the flesh that had fallen off her body. She might not see her again as soon as she left. She lowered her head and wiped her red eyes, but didn't turn her head and couldn't bear to look anymore. She waved her hand and gestured for her to leave. Zhang Yuqing pulled Wang Chuanyang onto the donkey cart that Lu Wei instructed Fang Mo to buy. Lu Wei pinned the long sword hanging from the saddle to his waist, quickly flipped over and mounted the horse, giving a brief command. "Let's go." Fang Qin shook the reins in his hand, and the donkey cart chased the galloping horse ahead. The early summer wind rolled up the curtains of the car, and the local customs and traditions of the small town gradually distanced themselves from Zhang Yuqing. The gears of fate, which had been stagnant for 13 years, finally began to rotate again on this day. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Entering Beijing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Entering Beijing. In order to take care of the speed of the donkey cart, Lu Wei didn't walk fast all the way. The horse, which traveled thousands of miles every day and 800 miles at night, forcefully walked at a walking speed. Fang Mo complained incessantly, "Young master, why don't we leave first and have Fang Qin and the 2 of us follow behind? Madam contacted a famous teacher in the capital for you, it's not good to be late." Lu Wei said, "This journey has not been peaceful. Since I have agreed to others, there is no reason to break my promise. What's the point of reasoning with that kind of person? Is she a reasonable person?" Fang Mo grumbled bitterly. His young master had always adhered to the principles of a gentleman, and was only entangled by a rogue woman like Zhang Yuqing. Lu Wei glanced lightly at Fang Mo and said, "Be cautious. Fame is too important for a woman, and besides, this woman belongs to the Zhang family. Whether her character is good or not will be disciplined by the Zhang family, and it's not their turn to speak." Yes, Fang Mo felt a chill in his heart and dared not say anything more. In the donkey cart, Wang Chuanyang felt uneasy and couldn't believe it. "I really want to go to the capital with you." "Really?" Zhang Yuqing smiled and said. Wang Chuanyang asked anxiously, "Have you really found your loved ones? What if they don't, or if they don't recognize you?" Zhang Yuqing let out a deep sigh and said softly, "It's already extremely difficult to get out of here. Besides, I dare not expect anything more. If they really don't recognize me, I have no choice but to complain." Wang Chuanyang looked at Zhang Yuqing's delicate hibiscus face, with a fragile light shining in her beautiful black eyes. She felt that Zhang Yuqing was a pitiful person. She was also a wealthy young lady who had fallen into this field. She comforted her and said, "Look at my mouth. Your family must be high-ranking officials in the capital. If you find them, good days will come." "Hopefully," murmured Zhang Yuqing. Wang Chuanyang smiled again and said, "The young master who rode the horse ahead looks strange and good-looking, but always has a cold face." She dared not even look at the elegant and noble young master, as if she, as a lowly person, would desecrate such a noble young master at a glance. "You're really amazing. If you wanted me, you wouldn't dare to talk to them," said Wang Chuanyang. Zhang Yuqing smiled and said, "They are also human, with 2 eyes and 1 nose. What are they afraid of?" Wang Chuanyang sighed and said, "I'm afraid it won't be easy to see my parents again after I leave. If your brother-in-law troubles my parents. The person surnamed LV is not my brother-in-law. He is just a beast who drinks heavily and beats women. Tiger Poison doesn't even eat children. He can sell his 3-year-old daughter for the sake of alcohol money, not even a dog. Your parents sold you to the one surnamed LV for a dowry of 2 taels of silver, serving as a stepmother for the 2 little beasts and taking care of their family. Do you still have to worry about the one surnamed LV causing trouble for them?" Zhang Yuqing said coldly. "The person surnamed LV is not foolish. He asked Wang's father and mother for 5 taels of silver before letting Wang Chuanyang go. 5 taels of silver is enough for him to marry Huang Hua's daughter, and he still has a lot of wine money left." Wang Chuanyang covered her face and felt a heart-wrenching pain as she remembered her daughter who had been sold. Crystal tears flowed through her fingers, choking her throat and unable to speak. There is a day when flowers bloom again, and there is a perfect time for people. Only by leaving here can we have the opportunity to find the child. One day we will find it. Zhang Yuqing hugged Wang Chuanyang's thin shoulder, with a determined light in her eyes. "Don't blame me for taking you away. I understand now. If we want to leave, we can go together. If we can't leave, then let's drag them to die together. What's the point of not dying?" "I don't want to say that." Wang Chuanyang covered Zhang Yuqing's mouth, tears streaming down her face. "You're all doing it for my good, I know." Fang Qin was driving in front of the car, and the wind was blowing hard. The voices inside the carriage were unclear, but Wang Chuanyang's crying could still be distinguished. "What a sin." Fang Qin shook her head and sighed in her heart. Just because Zhang Yuqing lacked someone to serve, poor Wang Chuanyang was forced to separate from her husband and relatives and followed Zhang Yuqing to the capital. Crying like this, "I must miss my family very much." Lu Wei never spoke to Zhang Yuqing along the way, as if a stranger was following behind him. Zhang Yuqing also knew that she had the audacity to pester Lu Wei, which made him very annoyed. She was particularly knowledgeable and didn't dare to bother Lu Wei with anything. The 2 sides walked strangely and peacefully all the way to the capital. When there were still 300 miles left from the capital, Lu Wei instructed Fang Mo to hurry up and take a step forward to inform the Zhang family about this matter. When Zhang Yuqing and his group arrived in the capital, it was already afternoon. The donkey cart clattered along the official road, and the city wall gradually emerged in sight. The city walls and roofs are covered with green glazed tiles, reflecting sunlight and shining brightly. The pedestrians on the road were jostling and dressed more elegantly and cleanly than in the surrounding areas. "Miss, the capital has arrived." Fang Qin saw the familiar city wall and felt happy, saying to the people behind him. Wang Chuanyang lifted the curtain to look at the towering city wall, looked up and exclaimed, "The city gates of this capital are really tall and big. More majestic and towering than the cities they saw along the way. The city walls were filled with soldiers standing 3 steps and 1 post, 5 steps and 1 post. As everyone approached, they could feel the height of the city wall and the insignificance of the people even more as they walked to the bottom of the wall. Fang Yamo has already informed the Zhang family and is currently standing outside the city gate with a horse waiting for Lu Wei. Young master. Fang Yamo exclaimed excitedly as he saw Lu Wei. Lu Wei stopped his horse. A middle-aged chubby-faced steward next to Fang Yamo quickly stepped forward and saluted. I am the steward of the Zhang family, named Li Degue. On behalf of the master, I have come to pick up this girl from the mansion and ask the old lady to take a look. This is a safe statement. I didn't immediately admit that Zhang Yuqing was the missing girl from the Zhang family. I just said to take her back and take a look, and whether I recognize her or not, I'll talk about it later. Upon hearing what was happening outside, Zhang Yuqing got out of the donkey cart and glanced at Li Degue. Li Degue also secretly scrutinized Zhang Yuqing. With just one glance, he was extremely shocked. He looked like the master of the Zhang family, no wonder the eldest son of the Lu family brought him back directly. At first glance, this girl looks even more beautiful than the famous big girl from the Zhang family in the capital. Zhang Yuqing faced Lu Wei, bowed long and said sincerely, I remember the great kindness and virtue of Lord Lu. Lord Lu's wealth and prosperity are smooth, and although I don't need to repay him, if there is anything useful for me, just give me orders. Lu Wei did not dismount, coldly bowed and turned the horse's head, leaving with Fang Yamo and Fang Qin. The wind blew the corners of Lu Wei's robe, and his straight and handsome figure quickly disappeared into the crowds of people coming and going in the capital. Zhang Yuqing withdrew his gaze and looked at the bustling street. The last time she was here was when the Hu people captured the capital, burned, killed, and looted. There were corpses everywhere, and blood stained the ground red. More than a decade has passed, and the bloody smell has already dissipated completely. Even the floor tiles have been polished to a shiny and smooth surface, calm and peaceful. Li Degue smiled and said, Miss, get in the car. I'll take you to the mansion. Thank you, Zhang Yuqing said and sat back in the car. Li Degue drove his donkey cart into the city gate, and the dazzling sunlight was completely blocked by the city wall. The donkey cart was dark inside. This city wall is really like a big mountain. Wang Chuanyang sighed. In the darkness, Zhang Yuqing remembered the tragedy that occurred in this city 13 years ago and said, I look like a cannibalistic tomb, burying many people. That person. Wang Chuanyang pointed to Li Degue, who was driving ahead, is that your relative? Is it your uncle? Zhang Yuqing shook his head and said, he is the steward of the Zhang family, a servant who serves the master. Wang Chuanyang was somewhat disappointed. Even if she grew up in the countryside since childhood, she knew that her relatives had come and her master's family would definitely welcome her, especially since she was a poor person who had been stranded for many years before being able to return home. It's good to see relatives, Wang Chuanyang comforted Zhang Yuqing by holding her hand, fearing that she would feel sad. Zhang Yuqing smiled. The map of this world had slowly unfolded towards her, and she was already a free person. She would never have been worse off than before. The donkey cart drove for 3/4 of an hour and came to a stop. Li Degue jumped off the donkey cart, lifted the curtain, and smiled, saying, Miss, it's time to get off at the Zhang mansion. Opening the curtain, Li Degue saw that there was still a person sitting in the car. Wang Chuanyang took off the handkerchief that wrapped her face in the car. Unexpectedly, someone saw the ugly scar that occupied half of her face. Li Degue was startled and let out a scream. Wang Chuanyang's heart trembled, and she hurriedly pulled off her handkerchief to cover her face. She lowered her head and dared not look up again. Zhang Yuqing held Wang Chuanyang's hand and looked at Li Degue coldly. He exclaimed in displeasure, What's your name? Li Degue apologized and said, It's impolite, girl. Don't blame me, don't blame me. He then secretly glanced at Wang Chuanyang, who had covered most of her face. He thought to himself, where did this mother Yeka come from? It's so scary in broad daylight. Zhang Yuqing got out of the donkey cart and looked up at the gate of the Zhang mansion. The main door was tightly closed with red lacquer and copper nails, and there were two small doors next to it. In the center of the door frame hung a plaque painted with gold, with the words, Zhang Dashu, a scholar's mansion, written on it. Li Deguai led Zhang Yuqing and Wang Chuanyang to the small door and knocked. After the door opened, Zhang Yuqing looked at the courtyard in front of him and saw a wall facing him, depicting high mountains and flowing water, with several green bamboo trees planted beside him. Bypassing the screen wall leads to a 3-in courtyard. The front yard is the place where the old master and the old master meet, as well as the place where the young masters study, Li Deguai introduced, leading the two out through the side door to a hanging flower arch where a middle-aged woman wearing a green silk double-breasted bikini waited. After seeing Zhang Yuqing's appearance, the middle-aged woman was also shocked. She secretly thought that he looked really like the handsome Zhang family master, with the gold collar hanging on his chest, and even dressed up well. Anyone who saw him would believe that this was the Zhang family girl. After exchanging a glance with Li Deguai, the middle-aged woman smiled and asked, "The girl looks really handsome." Li Deguai said to Zhang Yuqing, "Girl, follow Mom Lu inside." Zhang Yuqing nodded and followed Lu Mama into the yard. The little maid guarding the door lifted a thin bamboo curtain and shouted, "People are here." Mom Lu patted Zhang Yuqing's thin shoulder and said, "Go in, our Lady Zhang is waiting inside the house." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Home. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Home. Zhang Yuqing turned around and reminded Wang Chuanyang, "Wait for me here first, don't walk." Then he lifted his foot and walked up the stairs. Lu's mother looked at Zhang Yuqing's back. The 15-year-old girl was slender and straight, entering a magnificent mansion with flowers. She didn't look around, nor did she shrink or be timid. Her footsteps were steady, and she didn't look sideways. Maybe it's really the kind of Mr. Zhang from the Zhang family. Lu's mother muttered to herself. Wang Chuanyang watched in fear as Zhang Yuqing entered the room without looking back. She glanced left and right, and many maids and women were secretly scrutinizing her. Subconsciously, she wrapped her face tightly in a handkerchief, lowered her head, and dared not look up again. Zhang Yuqing entered the room and found only a young girl standing there, wearing a red gold pearl hairpin on her head, staring at her intently. "Miss, wait a moment. Our wife has just taken a nap and will be coming over soon," said the young girl. Zhang Yuqing nodded slightly and stood there with his hands down, waiting quietly. Before long, the pearl curtain in the inner room was lifted by someone. Zhang Yuqing raised his head and met the person who came out with a straight line of sight. She didn't feel anything, but Mrs. Zhang seemed to have seen a ghost. She took 2 steps back in shock and bumped into the maid who was following her. Zhang Yuqing immediately lowered his head. "Why are there suddenly more people here? They startle me." Mrs. Zhang patted her chest and smiled, concealing her composure. The young girl who received Zhang Yuqing immediately said, "It's because I neglected my duty and forgot to inform you first. This is the girl who came to recognize me." Madame walked over and sat on the couch, saying to Zhang Yuqing, "You lift your head and ask me to take a closer look." Zhang Yuqing lifted her head and saw clearly the Lady Zhang sitting on the couch. She was less than 40 years old, with thick powder on her face, drooping corners of her mouth, wrinkles around her eyes, thin eyebrows, and a narrow face. She wore a bright purple peony flower on her hair bun, and 2 phoenix beads on each side of her hair bun swayed with golden steps. The lady also carefully scrutinized Zhang Yuqing and once again saw the face that looked similar to her own husband's face. At that time, the twin sons of the Zhang family were famous handsome young masters in the capital, especially the Zhang family master. In addition to his outstanding appearance, his face was like a good girl, and his literary talent was even more remarkable. At first sight, the girl's eyebrows and eyes are exactly the same as those of the master Zhang. She has some similarities with her daughter Zhang Yuqing. Upon closer inspection, the beautiful and gentle face and temperament were carved from the same mold as the young lady of the Zhang family back then. Thinking of the young lady of the Zhang family who had died early, the lady felt a wave of anger in her heart. Looking down, she saw the gold collar hanging around Zhang Yuqing's neck. She lifted her chin and a maid came forward to take off Zhang Yuqing's collar, presenting it to his wife. The collar is almost the same as that of all the young masters and girls in the mansion, and the patterns and materials of the jade are the same. They are all carved out of a whole piece of high-quality jade in those years, and the child's name is engraved on each piece of jade. The jade in front of me is neatly engraved with the character, Qing. Madame frowned slightly and asked, "Do you still remember when you were a child?" "I don't remember very clearly. I only remember my father's surname, Zhang, but not Ming. My mother's surname was An, and my parents named me Yuqing. My father had a twin brother who was almost the same as him," said Zhang Yuqing, bowing his head. After a long time, the lady sitting on the couch said, "This matter is of great significance. Based solely on your words, I cannot make a final decision. Let me go and report it to my old lady. Someone, take this girl down to tea." After Zhang Yuqing left, Mrs. Zhang's face immediately pulled down. The woman next to her looked at her expression, pondering the master's thoughts, and said, "There is no evidence or evidence. Who knows the truth? You can easily inquire about what she said. Take a look at her face." Mrs. Zhang's heart caught fire as she kept fanning the fan. The master stands with her, and anyone can say they are biological father and daughter. She married the second master of the Zhang family. Although Zhang Zuoming, the elder master of the Zhang family, died in the troubled times, there is another Zhang Zuozhen, the second master of the Zhang family, who is exactly the same as the elder master of the Zhang family. Both of them are beautiful and famous as good girls. Can it be said that there is no blood relationship when you look so similar? If someone else sends it, just send it away with a few taels of silver. Unfortunately, it was sent by the eldest son of the Liu family. How could it be easily sent away? Mrs. Zhang's wife became more and more angry as she thought about it. She took a few sips of tea and said, "I still heard that Mrs. Hui will send it away." Mrs. Zhang and her maid went to visit the old man of the Zhang family. Since she grew old, Mrs. Zhang of the Zhang family has been reluctant to go out and lives in seclusion. She pays homage to the Buddha and burns incense, and doesn't take much care of her family's affairs. When Mrs. Zhang came over, the old lady was picking up Buddha beans. When she heard the girl arrive, her hand trembled and the Buddha beans fell to the ground. "Does it look like it?" the old lady suddenly asked without a thought. Mrs. Zhang smiled and said, "It's a bit similar. The young man of the Liu family has always been steady. If he can bring people, it means that it is very likely that he is our child," sighed the old lady. Mrs. Zhang sighed as if, "It's hard to say about this matter. When Qing and her sister were separated from us back then, they were only 2 years old and couldn't protect their belongings. It's possible that someone would snatch them." The old lady looked at Mrs. Zhang's wife with sharp eyes and said, "Do you mean someone found a girl who looks similar to me to pretend to be my sister?" Mrs. Zhang sighed and said, "Wealth is charming, some people. What do you think our family is worth plotting for?" The old lady smiled coldly, "Plotting for our family to decline year by year." Mrs. Zhang's face and ears turned red from choking, and she couldn't speak. There were so many families who lost their children back then, and there were so many wealthy and powerful ones. Why not pretend to be someone else's child and insist on pretending to be our family in the sunset of the West Mountain? "Does our Zhang family have a big reputation in the capital?" the old man asked the hostage. Mrs. Zhang dared not speak up. If Swimming were still here, how could our Zhang family be here? The old lady let out a long sigh, and a turbid tear rolled over the corner of her eye, landing on the Buddha bean. Mrs. Zhang's eyes flickered and she whispered, "Uncle, it's a pity to leave. If it weren't for rescuing the young lady who fell off the carriage, she would have escaped with us back then." Thinking of her eldest son who died tragically, the old lady's tears fell one after another. She thought her tears had dried up in this lifetime, but she couldn't help but cry and mourn. Mother's Day, you still have us. Zhang, the husband of the Zhang family, took out a handkerchief and wiped the old lady's tears, comforting her. The old lady stopped her tears and let out a long sigh, arrange a place for her to eat, dress, and live with Zhang Yuqing's sister. There is a 1 in 10,000 chance that she is the only bone and blood of Zhuaming. Even if she keeps it like a kitten or a puppy, she cannot throw it away and let Ming blame me under the 9 springs. Didn't you see her? I brought her here to kowtow to you, Mrs. Zhang asked tentatively. The old lady thought of her eldest son and shed tears. She shook her head and said, "We're gone for now. Let's talk about it in a few days. Please settle down with her. Once I see him, I think of my eldest son who died tragically. It's inevitable to feel sad and painful. It's better not to see him." Mrs. Zhang smiled and knew how to treat Zhang Yuqing. After Mrs. Zhang left, the old lady's heart was empty. She remembered her eldest son who had died tragically. She clenched her handkerchief with her fingers and sat restlessly. She said to the servant, "I'd better go take a look at her." After waiting for a long time, Zhang Yuqing finally received a steward. "Miss, I'll take you to your yard," the steward smiled. Zhang Yuqing hesitated and asked, "Where is your wife? Is this considered recognizing her or not? The affairs of this big family all need to be taken care of by Madam. Madam is busy. When she is free, she will come and see you. If you have anything to do, tell me the same." The steward smiled and said, "This chapter mansion will be your home from now on." Zhang Yuqing followed the steward out and called on Wang Chuanyang who was waiting outside. Wang Chuanyang felt like she was hanging a few buckets, but a bunch of maids and women stared at her. She opened her mouth and wanted to ask, but swallowed it again. As the group passed by the corridor, the old lady hiding behind the carved window of the corridor covered her mouth and almost sobbed as she saw Zhang Yuqing's face clearly. It's really too similar. More like Zhuaming than any other child in the family. If she were dressed in men's clothing and had thicker eyebrows, she might think that her tragically deceased eldest son had returned. The old lady stumbled back 2 steps and was supported by the maid who followed her. "Let's go." The old lady couldn't conceal her grief and turned around to leave. Upon hearing the commotion, Zhang Yuqing couldn't help but turn around and take a glance. He only saw bamboo leaves swaying behind the carved window in the corridor, and nothing else. The steward took Zhang Yuqing to a small courtyard, located in the remote northwest corner of the entire Zhang mansion. There were 3 wing rooms, and although the beds and furniture were simpler, they were all available. The accompanying maid used a chicken feather duster to clean the dust and quickly laid the bed. The steward looked at Wang Chuanyang standing behind Zhang Yuqing and asked tentatively. Zhang Yuqing said, "This is my foster parent's second sister, Chuanyang, who will live with me in the future." The eyes of several maids and women immediately gathered around Wang Chuanyang, whispering in secret. The steward looked at Wang Chuanyang curiously and vaguely, feeling that this woman was quite strange. It was already quite hot, and she even wrapped her head and face. "You can rest assured for now, and when Madam has time, we will arrange servants to serve you." The steward smiled, "There is a small stove here that can boil water. If you want to eat, you can ask Chuanyang to go to the big kitchen to get it. Whatever you want to eat, you can get it." After a while, Mrs. Zhang sent someone to deliver a few pieces of clothes to Zhang Yuqing. "This material is really good. The colors are also bright. I have never seen such good clothes before." Wang Chuanyang touched the soft and delicate silk dress, feeling deeply. As dusk approached, Mrs. Zhang sent someone to invite Zhang Yuqing and said to take her to meet several brothers and sisters in the mansion. Zhang Yuqing glanced at the patched linen clothes on his body, thought for a moment, and then picked a light-colored one from the clothes sent by Mrs. Zhang's family. He followed the maid to Mrs. Zhang's place. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The female protagonist of the novel. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. The female protagonist of the novel. The maid in Mrs. Zhang's courtyard looked at Zhang Yuqing's noticeably loose clothes, and then at the bald bun without even a silver hairpin. She quickly lowered her head, afraid that she wouldn't be able to hold back her laughter. "Let's go," Zhang Yuqing said coldly. As soon as she arrived at the entrance of the courtyard, Zhang Yuqing heard the lively laughter coming from inside. The maid at the door called out and led Zhang Yuqing into the inner room. After Zhang Yuqing entered, the laughter and joy suddenly came to an end, and several people on the table turned their heads to look at her. Come and sit down." Mrs. Zhang held a young master who was 3 or 4 years old in her arms and waved at Zhang Yuqing, instructing the maid to bring a chair for him. Zhang Yuqing sat down and scanned the people in the room one by one. When he touched a girl of her age, dressed elegantly and shining, he couldn't help but take 2 more glances. "Mother, who is this younger sister?" the girl asked Mrs. Zhang with a smile. Mrs. Zhang patted the girl's shoulder and said meaningfully, "I was about to introduce her to you. She is not a younger sister, but an older sister. She is your late uncle's daughter Yuqing, who has been wandering and only found today." "Sister," exclaimed a boy next to him who looked 12 or 13 years old, "is she even older than Sister Yuqing?" Mrs. Zhang said, "She is 2 months older than your sister Yuqing." A little girl next to the boy was round and round, looking about 12 or 13 years old. She smiled at Zhang Yuqing with her eyebrows and eyes curved, and sweetly shouted, "Hello sister. This is your eldest sister Yuqing, this is your second sister Yushu, this is your second brother Yuqing, and this is your younger brother Yujin," Mrs. Zhang introduced. "You also have your eldest brother Yuqian, who is studying in the outer courtyard. You can see him on his day off." Zhang Yuqing wore a perfectly shy smile and nodded to the young masters and girls of the Zhang family one by one. "Why are you wearing Sister Yuqing's clothes?" Zhang Yuqing tilted his head and asked in confusion. Zhang Yushu felt a little nervous when he heard this and pushed Zhang Yuqing, "Don't say that. Why don't you let me tell you, I'm not talking nonsense." Zhang Yuqing shouted, pointing to the clothes on Zhang Yuqing's body. "I've seen Big Sister wear them. They're Big Sister's clothes." To put aside an ordinary person, she would have been ashamed to cover her face long ago, but Zhang Yuqing is not an ordinary person. She can shamelessly rely on the unfamiliar Lu Wei, wearing clothes that others don't want is nothing. "So it's Yuqing's sister's clothes, thank you very much, sister." Zhang Yuqing smiled and said, "Otherwise, would have to wear patched linen clothes to meet you." Mrs. Zhang glanced at Zhang Yuqing, whose face remained unchanged, sneered, and made amends, saying, "Your elder sister has just returned home and hasn't come yet to make new clothes. You look really like my dad." Zhang Yuqing stared at Zhang Yuqing. "Why weren't you at my house before? Where did you go?" Zhang Yuqing said, "After I separated from my family, I was adopted by a farming family and grew up at their house. By chance, I returned home. I heard you also brought a maid, who is your foster parents' daughter?" Zhang Yuqing asked with a smile. Zhang Yuqing's eyelashes trembled lightly. Since she had already inquired about her situation, she just pretended to ask who she was and what. "She's not my maid," Zhang Yuqing said simply. Zhang Yuqing wore a decent smile on her face, and seeing that she didn't want to say much, she turned to ask, "It must have been very difficult to stay overnight all the way." "Thank you for your concern, younger sister. The journey has been safe and peaceful, quite good, not difficult," said Zhang Yuqing. At this moment, the maid rushed in with dishes and placed them on the table. But when 5 people ate, they served a full 10 dishes, with fish and meat, which were very abundant. Behind each person, there is a servant girl who takes care of the dishes and puts them into the dish in front of the master. The Zhang family values eating without saying anything. In the midst of almost no sound of chopsticks, bowls, or dishes colliding, Zhang Yuqing had a meal that he didn't know the taste of. After all, he had to be careful not to make jokes about his lack of etiquette, which made him feel tired. After eating, Zhang Yuqing expressed his gratitude and farewell with a witty expression. After Zhang Yuqing left, the maidservant took off the jewelry on Mrs. Zhang's head and prepared to take a shower. Zhang Yuqing refused to leave for a long time and stayed here playing with the jewelry on Mrs. Zhang's dressing table. After a while, she couldn't help but ask, "Mom, was she really brought back by Lu Wei? Did she live with Lu Wei all the way?" Mrs. Zhang was leaning against the bed with her eyes closed, enjoying the maid's scalp massage. Upon hearing this, she opened her eyes and joked, "I said, why haven't you returned yet? So you're worried about this?" "I'm not worried." Zhang Yuqing felt embarrassed. "I just asked." Mrs. Zhang secretly said to her daughter, "Although she has shown maturity and stability in her daily life, it is still a little girl's mind. Mr. Lu, the young master of the Lu family, brought people to our house openly. How could he have any shady dealings with that girl?" But Zhang Yuqing felt uneasy. She remembered Zhang Yuqing's beautiful appearance with clear water and lotus flowers. Although she didn't want to admit that Zhang Yuqing was more beautiful than her, she felt uneasy when she thought that Lu Wei had always taken Zhang Yuqing along the way, a lonely man and a widow, and a melon field and a plum blossom. Mrs. Zhang waved her hand and said, "What's good about it? Lu Wei is a descendant of a prestigious family and has close ties with the royal family. As for being so greedy, is he willing to eat like this?" Zhang Yuqing blushed and complained, "Mother. What's this all about? She's still an unmarried young lady like Yuning." Mrs. Zhang said solemnly, "You were carefully raised and raised by us. You are proficient in all kinds of music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, and even have the title of the four masters of the capital. What does she have? She was raised by mud-legged people in the countryside, so vulgar that she can't even compare to a single strand of your hair. Lu Wei is interested in her, unless she is blind. He sent that girl to the capital, isn't it for your face?" Thinking that Lu Wei saw her face before sending Zhang Yuqing to the capital, Zhang Yuqing blushed and said with a reserved tone, "I didn't let Lu Wei send her to the capital." Mrs. Zhang hugged her delicate daughter, who looked like a flower and jade, and said, "My son, you can't compare yourself to her. It's really hard to think about it. Your grandmother promised to let her into this house because she remembered your deceased uncle and felt sorry for her. To be honest, what's the difference between her and a useless person? It's not even serious to take her for a marriage alliance. They look up to her. If you compare yourself to her, it's a violation of yourself." Zhang Yuqing hugged Mrs. Zhang's arm and nodded with a smile, finally calming the discomfort in her heart. Her own mother was also a well-known lady from a prestigious family back then. She looked down upon this and that, huh? Mrs. Zhang sneered, unable to suppress her pride. 30 years in the East and 30 years in the West, she died while I was alive. Her daughter couldn't even compare to a single strand of my daughter's hair. Zhang Yuqing was impatient to hear about dead people and always felt unlucky. She muttered, "You said my grandmother promised to let her in, so she must have felt sorry for her. It's all fake. Your grandmother doesn't even want to see her." Mrs. Zhang sighed. Back then, her wet nurse held her in a carriage, but even someone took her off the carriage. Behind her was the Hu man. Your uncle jumped off the carriage to save her, but the Hu man who chased after him chopped off his head. Zhang Yuqing trembled in fear and buried her head in the arms of Mrs. Zhang's family. Your uncle was the Tanhua Lang back then. She was fine, your uncle died tragically. A girl's life was exchanged with Tanhua Lang. Can your grandmother not blame her? She hates her so much. Mrs. Zhang pursed her lips and gently stroked Zhang Yuqing's back, comforting her. Relax, my son, your grandmother still loves you the most. Zhang Yuqing raised her head and curiously asked, how did her mother die? Her mother was so scared that she couldn't sit still when she saw her father jump off the car and be killed by the Hu people. She fell off the car and died, Mrs. Zhang said lightly. The maid who was massaging Mrs. Zhang's scalp couldn't help but say, "Listen, it's scary. This girl is really evil." As if she had been pointed out by someone, Lady Zhang suddenly realized and stood up straight, clapping her hands and saying, "Yes, it's not just evil. It's simply." Mrs. Zhang swallowed her blurted words, but everyone understood. This chapter Yuqing is simply a celestial demon and a lone star, killing his own parents. The servants in the room couldn't tell that their wife didn't like this cheap niece who suddenly appeared, and they all agreed, "We have to go around that place in the future. You can't get caught up in bad luck." At night, Zhang Yuqing lay in bed, closing her eyes and thinking of the Zhang Yuqing she had met today. After the mysterious power cast her into this body, I briefly introduced the main plot of this novel. Zhang Yuqing is the protagonist of this Mary Sue novel, and the entire novel is written around her, documenting her epic and magnificent life. But the specific magnificent method and mysterious power have not been elaborated on. Looking back now, I only vaguely remember that Zhang Yuqing was loved by everyone, and flowers bloomed at every moment. Along the way, she gained many handsome men's hearts. She had been engaged to Lu Whiting since childhood, but by chance, she married someone else. Lu Wei's love for Zhang Yuqing was so crazy that even if Zhang Yuqing married someone else, he remained deeply in love. Since it's Mary Sue, how can there be only one man? Lu Wei, who had never been married to Zhang Yuqing, kept their previous engagement and waited patiently. After Zhang Yuqing's husband's death, he eventually moved her and took over the widow and her son, achieving a happy ending. Zhang Yuqing thought of Lu Wei, who was kept away from strangers, and sneered in the darkness. If it weren't for the mysterious power of the spoilers, she wouldn't have seen that this was a kind of love that could crash into a big wall for love. Forget it, it's none of her business. Zhang Yuqing raised the blanket and slept with his head covered. The next morning, Mrs. Zhang arranged for a little maid to serve Zhang Yuqing. The little maid was not yet 10 years old, and had already heard the older maid in the yard describe how evil Zhang Yuqing was, how much she controlled the people around her, just like a walking humanoid demon, emitting black energy all over her body. After a heart-wrenching past, the little girl entered the yard and saw Wang Chuanyang, who knew how to clean her face with a handkerchief. The ferocious scar that occupied the left half of Wang Chuanyang's face collided with the little girl's eyes. The little girl let out a scream and sat down on the ground, shouting mournfully, "Ghost, ghost." End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Recognition of relatives. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Recognition of relatives. Zhang Yuqing rushed out of the room and stuffed the handkerchief she was washing her face into the little girl's mouth, shouting fiercely, "Shut up." Wang Chuanyang ran back into the room trembling, wrapping her face tightly. The little girl looked at Zhang Yuqing in horror with tears in her eyes. "Who are you?" Zhang Yuqing asked with unfriendly eyes. The little girl whimpered and couldn't speak. Zhang Yuqing reached out and took out the handkerchief from the little girl's mouth. "I, on behalf of my wife, came to serve you." The little girl trembled as she cried. She was so afraid of this heavenly demon lone star that she heard of someone close to her. Zhang Yuqing's teeth are a bit itchy. This little girl looks less than 10 years old. Who will take care of her? I don't need anyone to serve me, you go back. Zhang Yuqing waved his hand. The little girl couldn't wait to leave quickly, got up from the ground and ran without looking back. Wang Chuanyang wrapped her face and only revealed a pair of eyes. She came out of the room and looked at Zhang Yuqing with concern. "Why don't I just leave? The children haven't even started searching yet, where are you going? You need to leave. When you find the children, you take them with you." Zhang Yuqing put down a sentence, took the food box and went out, closed the yard door, and inserted the door bolt. Wang Chuanyang looked at the tightly closed courtyard door and sighed, "I'm afraid I'll drag you down." When Zhang Yuqing went out to fetch breakfast, he could always sense the probing gaze projected from all directions, and could also hear whispers such as, "sweeping star," and, "heavenly demon lonely star." At noon, when she went to fetch lunch, she heard, "she raised a ghost," and, "it scared me to death." By the evening, she went to fetch dinner, and the terrifying legend of the Zhang family had progressed to the point where, "I heard that at night, horns would grow on her head." Zhang Yuqing lay in bed, full of food and drink, sighing that the Zhang family was truly worthy of being able to have a great female lead. The temple was small and the demon wind was strong, and there were many shallow kings in the pond. A scholarly lady indulged in spreading such rumors among servants, and she truly experienced the level of disgust that Lady Zhang had towards her. 2 days later, Mrs. Zhang sent someone to inform her that the old master, and young master of the family would come back in the evening. The whole family would have a meal together, which could be considered as a formal introduction of Zhang Yuqing to the Zhang family. Mrs. Lu, the steward who came to deliver the message, secretly glanced at Wang Chuanyang with a handkerchief wrapped around her face. She thought to herself that her eyes were gentle and beautiful, but the little girl said that this woman described her as ugly and terrifying, even more terrifying than the yiksha in a ghost story. She didn't know what she looked like after taking off her handkerchief. This newly recognized young lady is also strange. She doesn't want to be a well-proportioned maid, just this rural woman with scars on her face. "Thank you for taking this trip, thank you very much," Zhang Yuqing said. "If Mom has the time, could you tell me about the situation of the old master and the old master?" Lu's mother saw that she was still wearing the coarse linen clothes she wore when she entered the mansion, and estimated that it was the clothes that Miss Yueying did not want sent by her wife. She was reluctant to wear them. Without the protection of her parents, it was pitiful that the legitimate eldest daughter of the Zhang family had fallen to a point where she was not even a commoner. Lu's mother sat down and gave her a brief introduction. "Our old man was a second-rank counselor in politics during his lifetime. When the ancestors of the Zhang family were in their prime, they were appointed as grand preceptors and privy councillors, and there were 7 successful candidates in the imperial examination alone. What a truly scholarly family. Every inch of land in the capital is worth every inch of gold, but you can see that the Zhang family's house was newly built after the Luowei incident, and it is also one of the largest houses in the capital," said Lu Mama proudly. Zhang Yuqing was slightly surprised in his heart. He was like a deputy prime minister and a prominent figure in power, but unfortunately, Grandpa Zhang passed away. "Miss, your biological father is the eldest master of our family, a flower scout. Not only is he a first-class scholar, but he is also one of the most handsome. After the eldest master went to flower scouting in high school, he rode horses and strolled the streets, and countless young girls and daughter in law threw sachets and handkerchiefs at the eldest master. Tsk. You don't know how beautiful and lively it is. Many people are saying something, oh yes. Giving birth should be like Zhang swimming." Lu's mother looked at Zhang Yuqing and sighed deeply. If the master were still alive, with the master's doting on his daughter, this girl would now be a charming guest who is admired by many stars. The daughter of the flower seeker must be more dignified than Miss Yueying. "Is that so?" Zhang Yuqing said softly, imagining the scene of his father throwing a fruit-filled cart back then, and a smile couldn't help but appear on his face. Lu's mother patted Zhang Yuqing's hand and comforted her, saying, "The girl has returned to her own home now and has settled down. Please rest assured that good days are ahead." "I don't know where my uncle is now," Zhang Yuqing asked. Lu's mother smiled and said, "Our master is now a court official." Zhang Yuqing waited for a while, but when Lu's mother said anything else, she quickly understood. Not to mention comparing with her ancestors' scenery, but also comparing with her twin brothers, Zhang Zuozhen is really not good at it. In middle age, she is only in the 7th grade, with a low rank and poor performance. She is too embarrassed to mention it, so she just vaguely mentioned it. You also have a younger brother, young Master Yuqian, who is almost 14 years old and is studying in the outer courtyard. You will be able to see him tomorrow, Lu's mother said. Young Master Yuqian, young Master Yuqing, young Master Yujin, and Miss Yueying were all born to Madam. The Miss Yushu you saw the other day was born to Aunt Yuan. Zhang Yuqing, who was once a member of the political power center, passed away. Zhang Yuqing, who was considered the successor of the Zhang family, unfortunately passed away during the war. The surviving Zhang Yuqing had little ability, and the new generation was too young to stand on their own. Now is the time to decline. Zhang Yuqing summarized. I just don't know if this is the lowest point of the Zhang family, or if I will continue to run downhill in the future. Is there no other child in my generation? Zhang Yuqing asked. Lu's mother smiled and shook her head. Zhang Yuqing knew very well that all three grandsons of the Zhang family had crawled out of Mrs. Zhang's belly. No wonder Mrs. Zhang had the confidence to hold on to her and blatantly didn't take her seriously. Nowadays, the head of the household is the lady, and the old lady basically doesn't care about anything. Lu's mother hinted, the girl should go to the lady's place more often when she has time, and do her utmost filial piety. Zhang Yuqing smiled and nodded, seeing off Lu Mama. Wang Chuanyang is worried about Zhang Yuqing. She has been here for a few days and has observed a lot. Although she has never seen Miss Zhang, she has seen the maids of the Zhang family, all dressed in gold and silver, with exquisite and luxurious clothes and shoes, just like the fairy in the painting. This chapter's family is truly a nest of wealth and prosperity. Although Zhang Yuqing is a serious young lady from the Zhang family, she is not even as good as a maid. I can make shoes, why don't we make a pair of shoes for your aunt, said Wang Chuanyang. Zhang Yuqing looked at Wang Chuanyang with a serious expression on her face, shook her head and chuckled, you can make shoes for yourself, just give them to her. How can we forget it? This is your filial piety. Pleasing madam will also benefit you. Wang Chuanyang advised. Zhang Yuqing still shook his head and said with an undeniable tone, don't waste your time. Wang Chuanyang could only sigh. In the afternoon, Zhang Yuqing changed into a new outfit, and Wang Chuanyang combed her hair and inserted a silk flower that was sent by Lu Mama today. This flower is really beautiful. Wang Chuanyang smiled, it looks like it's real. Zhang Yuqing chuckled lazily and looked at the flower made of cloth inside the bronze mirror, it's just a worthless thing. Don't even think about it, it must be something that Zhang Yueying doesn't want. After leaving the door, Lu's mother was already waiting there, leading her to the front yard. Lu's mother looked at Zhang Yuqing and sighed, the girl is really handsome. Mom overestimated me. Zhang Yuqing lowered her head and made a shy appearance. In the front yard, Zhang Yuqing walked into the room. Inside the front hall, Zhang Yueying was leading Zhang Yuqing, while Zhang Yujin and Zhang Yushu were flipping through a book, occasionally laughing out loud. Seeing Zhang Yuqing walking over, she saw a clean hibiscus face with a light yellow camellia silk flower at her temples. Zhang Yueying's eyes flickered, and she couldn't help but think of a poem. Clear water produces hibiscus, naturally to be carved. The cheap and tacky cloth flower that I don't want looks pretty on this rural girl. Zhang Yueying's heart began to feel uneasy again, but when she thought of her mother's words, comparing herself to her was tantamount to self-deprecation, lowering her value. She put on a friendly smile and waved, saying, you're here, come and play together. A maid guarding the front hall entered the inner room and went to inform the master that Zhang Yuqing had come. Zhang Yuqing looked up and asked, didn't her mother say she grew up in the countryside? Can she recognize characters? Don't talk nonsense. Zhang Yueying quickly glanced at Zhang Yuqing and scolded her younger brother. Zhang Yushu and Zhang Yujin felt a bit nervous in the atmosphere and didn't dare to speak out. Zhang Yuqing's face remained unchanged. He sat aside and glanced at the cover of the book, which turned out to be a joke. He shook his head and said, you continue reading, I don't recognize the characters. How could you say I'm talking nonsense again? She even said she doesn't recognize me. Zhang Yuqing stared and stomped his feet, very angry. Zhang Yuqing smiled and rubbed Zhang Yuqing's head, coaxing him, okay, you're right. She then put on a decent smile and pushed a plate of melon seeds on the small table in front of Zhang Yuqing. My younger brother is young and has no intention of speaking. Don't take it to heart, eat melon seeds. Thank you, Sister Yuqing. Zhang Yuqing smiled and glanced at Zhang Yuqing, who continued reading without any heart or lungs. Zhang Yuqing, who occasionally burst out laughing, curved his lips. Mrs. Zhang, who is covered in heart and mind all over her body, surprisingly gave birth to such an iron and silly person at this moment. The maid who had previously reported to the inner room came out and approached Zhang Yuqing, whispering, Madam, please come in. Before she could finish speaking, Zhang Yuqing immediately looked over. Zhang Yuqing's face remained unchanged, and he got up and walked into the inner room, lifting the pearl curtain and entering. An old lady with grey hair and a brown fuzzy tattoo on her forehead sat on the central couch, with Mrs. Zhang sitting next to her. This is your grandmother. Mrs. Zhang smiled. The maid next to her brought a cushion, and Zhang Yuqing knelt down. The old lady looked at her face, and her grief that had just calmed down surged again, tears quickly filling her eyes. Madame Zhang quickly wiped the old lady's tears, frowned, and waved to Zhang Yuqing, who had just knelt down and didn't even have time to speak, your grandmother can't see you. You go out first. End of this chapter. 10, Chapter 10 Debt of Silver. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Debt of Silver. At this moment, the front hall became noisy. A maid came in and reported that the master and young master had come. As they were speaking, a middle-aged man and a chubby young man entered the inner room one after another. Mrs. Zhang stood up and bowed, Master. Zhang Yuqing couldn't help but look up at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was dressed in a green official robe, with a well-trimmed beard. He was elegant and handsome, as if the young man who jumped out of the car 13 years ago to save her from the chaos of knives and corpses had crossed the tide of time and came to her from the depths of her memory. With just one glance, Zhang Yuqing could no longer suppress the pain. Her eyes turned red and she trembled as she lowered her head. 2 tears fell to the ground. She occupied the body of the original owner and shared 2 years of meticulous and gentle fatherly love with him. How could she not miss the person who was grateful for giving her gentle fatherly love, and even sacrificed her life for her? The middle-aged man looked at Zhang Yuqing and asked Mrs. Zhang, is this the eldest niece? It's her. You don't know, the old lady feels really uncomfortable when she sees her. Mrs. Zhang whispered. Seeing Zhang Yuqing still standing there, Mrs. Zhang frowned and said, why are you still here? Didn't I just let you out? The short and chubby boy, who looked 13 or 14 years old, wore a green silk shirt and glanced at Zhang Yuqing, bowing his head to salute the old lady. Zhang Yuqing took 2 steps back, turned around and walked out. The old lady behind her shouted, stop. She stopped and turned around, standing quietly with her head down. The old lady stopped Zhang Yuqing for a while and didn't know what to ask. Looking at her face that looked like her eldest son, she asked for a long time, how have you been? These years. Zhang Yuqing lowered his head and said, it's quite good. The old lady sighed and said, in rural areas, there is a shortage of food and clothing. How can we get better? Zhang Yuqing stopped speaking. What kind of people are the parents who raised you? The old lady asked. Zhang Yuqing said, it's just an ordinary farmer's family who makes a living by farming. The old lady remembered Zhang Yuqing, the granddaughter of a renowned and shining lady, who could be considered a model of a noble lady. Seeing Zhang Yuqing again, she couldn't help but feel disappointed. Finally, she asked, do you have any wishes that we would like to help you achieve? After thinking for a moment, Zhang Yuqing said, the young master who sent me home. Upon hearing these words, Mrs. Zhang immediately remembered the slight displeasure of Zhang Yuqing, and her eyes suddenly became sharp. She quickly shouted, "Why are you mentioning someone? Could it be that this rural girl has developed feelings for Lu Wei? Shameless. What a big courage." Speaking fluently, as Zhang Yuqing frowned and looked at her with disgust, Mrs. Zhang gritted her teeth and softened her tone, saying, "The capital is a place for etiquette. As an unmarried girl, you still need to be careful not to talk about your ex-husband, so that others may hear him, thinking that our Zhang family girls have no rules. Can't you let others finish talking? You are like a tigress all day long. You have the final say. You are very powerful." Zhang Yuqing said angrily. Mrs. Zhang's face turned red, and her chest was filled with intense fluctuations of qi. "Dad!" The young master was both anxious and angry, staring at Zhang Yuqing and embracing Mrs. Zhang's arm. The old lady glanced at Zhang Yuqing with a warning, her eyes icy, and said, "Speak up." Zhang Yuqing seemed frightened and helpless, trembling in a voice, "That young master gave my adoptive parents 30 taels of silver to settle the debt. I thought this money shouldn't be given by outsiders, but I don't have any money. I see, wouldn't it be better if I had explained it clearly earlier?" Mrs. Zhang forced a smile on her face. Zhang Yuqing lowered his head and sneered, "Had he already made it clear? You let me tell you. Sorry to trouble you." Zhang Yuqing bowed and bowed. "We're all a family, what's so polite?" Mrs. Zhang smiled. The old lady stopped talking to Zhang Yuqing. Zhang Yuqing looked at the young master leaning against Mrs. Zhang and said, "Tell me about the lessons you've learned recently." The young master seemed unprepared for Zhang Yuqing to randomly check her homework before the family banquet. After hesitating for a while, he finally stumbled and memorized an article. Zhang Yuqing couldn't hide the disappointment on her face and widened her eyes, as she was about to explode. The old lady quickly smiled and said, "Not bad. Brother Qian has made progress and will work harder in the future. Yu Qian, take your sister out." Mrs. Zhang said quickly as she saw that Zhang Yuqing's face was not looking good. Zhang Yuqing breathed a big sigh of relief, feeling that he had overcome the situation. He smiled and agreed, and walked out first, followed by Zhang Yuqing. He didn't know if Zhang Yuqing had intentionally stopped at the pearl curtain. When she came over, he threw the pearl curtain back high. If it weren't for Zhang Yuqing's quick eyes and quick hands blocking the curtain, the pearl curtain might have hit her in the face. Humph. Zhang Yuqing turned around and saw the pearl curtain hitting her arm, lifting his chin and snorting coldly in dissatisfaction. Zhang Yuqing stopped, her black eyes gleaming with a cold light. After Zhang Yuqing took 2 steps and distanced herself, she lifted her foot and walked out. Zhang Yuqing, who was not tall, ran a few steps to reach Zhang Yuqing, sat down, and smiled affectionately, "Big sister." Zhang Yuqing and the others said they were reading a book, but in reality, their eyes were fixed on this side of the inner room. They had already caught a glimpse of Zhang Yuqing's small movements. Zhang Yuqing glanced at Zhang Yuqing who was slowly approaching and smiled, "Look at you, you look like a skin monkey." After Zhang Yuqing sat down, there were only 2 empty seats left. Zhang Yuqing either chose to sit next to Zhang Yuqing or next to Zhang Yushu. She couldn't make up her mind for a moment and saw Zhang Yushu patting the chair next to her through the hanging tablecloth, so she sat down. "Everyone can come into our house now." Zhang Yuqing rolled his eyes and muttered. Zhang Yuqing patted his shoulder and comforted him with a smile, saying, "I finally went home. Why is there so much anger? Am I wrong? Who is she?" Zhang Yuqing snorted coldly. Zhang Yushu probably didn't expect Zhang Yuqing to treat Zhang Yuqing so badly. His face turned a bit pale, and even the insincere Zhang Yuqing noticed something and put the joke book aside. At this moment, a maid in the room came over with a bowl and smiled as she placed it in front of Zhang Yuqing. She said, "The kitchen has made cheese soup today," and the old lady said to give it to the young master to taste. Zhang Yuqing glanced at it and complained softly, "Sweet and greasy, who loves to eat it?" The maid smiled and said, "Young master, please taste it." The old lady's heart is in her heart. She must have felt sorry for the young master's hard work in studying. No one else has it. Zhang Yuqing had to eat with a spoon. The old lady and her group came out of the room and sat on the big table. Mrs. Zhang instructed the maids to prepare the meal. Zhang Yuqing said, "There is news in the palace that the crown princess has recently experienced a cold wind. Several families have taken the lead and said that the Lantern Festival will be celebrated in 2 days, and each household should hang lanterns to pray for the crown princess's blessings." Madame Zhang immediately asked, "Our family also needs to prepare it. What's the point? Pray for the crown princess, everyone in the family must go." Zhang Yuqing said impatiently. The old lady nodded and said, "This is a big event in the palace. Our family can do it the best, at least we can't fall behind others." "Yes," Mrs. Zhang said respectfully. While the maid was placing the dishes, Mrs. Zhang glanced at Zhang Yuqing, who was sitting quietly there, and tentatively asked the old lady, "Mother, is she still going with her?" The old lady's expression remained calm as usual, and she said calmly, "Didn't you hear the master say we should all go?" Mrs. Zhang made a fuss and forced a smile on her face, "I heard you." After eating, the old lady said she was weak and let the younger generation disperse. Zhang Yuqing and Mrs. Zhang said a few words to the old lady and also went back. Stepping out of the old lady's yard, Mrs. Zhang showed goodwill and softened her tone, saying, "Master, go to my place to discuss hanging the lamp." Zhang Yuqing impatiently said, "Hang a lamp, what's there to discuss? Besides, what's not up to you at home?" After that, he went straight to his aunt's yard in front of a group of maids and women, without giving a single glance to Mrs. Zhang behind her. Zhang Fu's popular lips were trembling, and he struggled not to shed tears and lose face in front of his servants. When he walked into his own room, he couldn't help but grit his teeth and curse, "That broom star. It's not good when it comes." "Not really." Mrs. Zhang's close maid quickly agreed, "If it weren't for her, could the master calm down with her?" "Madam, it's really heartbreaking to see such an unlucky person on the street. Our wife is kind-hearted, give her a bite to eat." Upon hearing that the servants had scolded Zhang Yuqing to the point of bloodshed, Mrs. Zhang felt a little better. However, she thought of going out with Zhang Yuqing to hang lanterns in a couple of days, and it was inevitable that she would meet the people she had befriended. At that time, she would inevitably have to introduce Zhang Yuqing to them. Thinking of Zhang Yuqing's beautiful face that blended the strengths of Zhang Zuoming and ensure, Mrs. Zhang felt a wave of frustration and squeezed out a few words from between her teeth, "It's so haunting." At the same time, Zhang Yuqing also lost his temper inside the room, patting the table and shouting, "Grandmother must have lost her head. Let that thing of unknown origin come into our house." Zhang Yuqing looked displeased and said, "Why are you still holding on to her? You really don't know what grandma means when she gives you cheese soup. It's just to block your mouth and tell you not to say anything. Am I holding on to her and not letting her go?" Zhang Yuqing said angrily, "When she comes, she makes my father embarrassed for my mother. He's just a despicable star." Zhang Yuqing sighed. Their parents and husband have been at odds for a long time, and whether or not Zhang Yuqing is here does not affect Zhang Zuoxin's embarrassment to Mrs. Zhang. Zhang Yuqing said this, but it was just bullying Zhang Yuqing and deliberately venting his anger on her. "Grandma asked to keep her, but we didn't like her." "Just stay away from her," said Zhang Yuqing. Zhang Yuqing felt unhappy in his heart, but there was nothing he could do. The Zhang family couldn't make him the master of the house yet. He remembered hearing that the broom star was brought back by his future brother-in-law Lu Wei, and even Lu Wei complained, "My brother-in-law is the same. Even the illiterate rural mud legs come to our house to collect them. If he didn't bring people, wouldn't it be like this? I really don't know what kind of mesmerizing soup that broom star gave my brother-in-law. I must ask him carefully tomorrow when I hang the lamp to see him." Zhang Yuqing's face didn't look good, and she scolded in a low voice, "Stop talking nonsense." After a while, she couldn't help but defend Lu Wei. He probably thought that woman might be my sister, so he brought her back to the capital. Cheap on her. Zhang Yuqing said angrily. The next day, Lu's mother went to Zhang Yuqing's yard and told her that tomorrow night at the Beijing Lantern Festival, the Zhang family would go out and hang lanterns to pray for the sick crown princess. Zhang Yuqing lowered her eyes for a moment and asked curiously, "Is the crown princess seriously ill?" End of this chapter.